Welcome back to part 2 of our Last of Us Part 2 coverage, which, now that I'm thinking about it, title-wise, we could have workshopped a little bit better. Today, I'm joined once again by Danielle from Level Story.
Hello, everyone.
And a special guest for today's episode to help us cover the gargantuan game that is The Last of Us Part 2. We're joined by Sam from Games is Lit.
Hello.
So the reason I've recruited you both today is for a mission, should you choose to accept it, that is going to get really complicated and be kind of it's going to be a journey for sure. So if you listen to the last part, which I definitely recommend doing before this one, you'll know that Danielle and I walked through the questionable career of Neil Druckmann, the game director of The Last of Us and one of the co-directors of The Last of Us Part 2, with the specific intention of trying to understand how this guy's career came together, the various aspects that led him to become the game director at Naughty Dog and a vice president, and a bit of the sort of the questionable things that had happened to him, to try and shine some light on the influences that behind these projects. Because obviously he was the person who came up with the idea for the first game. So even though the second game has a lot of different writers and several co-directors, really it's still his baby in some ways. So just a quick disclaimer before we get started into any of the analysis or give you any of the sort of introduction. I just want to make something really clear at the start here. I don't think that The Last of Us Part 2 is social justice warrior propaganda. I think that criticism is inherently invalid. But if you think that, please stick around because I think you'll still get something out of this. I'm not going to disabuse you of the belief that it is propaganda if that's what you want to think, but hopefully we'll be able to expose some of the underlying issues with the game, talk about the things that are working really well, and hopefully try to surface some really critical discussion of the text. I also want to front load this by pointing out that if anything, The Last of Us Part 2 has a lot of issues in the way it represents LGBTIQ plus relationships and the way that it sort of propagates those themes, to the point where I think it's probably more a result of confused writing rather than bad gender politics. But to the point where the queer politics present are extremely heteronormative, the game presents a version of queerness that is the most digestible to its primary straight audience, which is more of a mechanic of capitalism rather than an artistic choice, in my opinion. Which is all to say that I disagree with both the assertion this text is somehow shilling an agenda for this malicious deep state, but I also reject the assertion that this text is necessarily revolutionary in its representation. So I just wanted to put that out at the front. Please stick around even if that made your hackles rise and you want to send me a death threat, because that does happen. But please stick around. I'm sure you'll get something from it anyway. So before we get into the fun stuff, just a quick bit of a top level. This is going to be part 2, what I'm calling a distorted return. The Last of Us Part 2 is a third-person action-adventure game developed by Naughty Dog, published by Sony for the PlayStation 4. It was written by Neil Druckmann and Haley Gross. Druckmann is a Vans, jeans, and hoodie guy with a man bun and a beard. Haley Gross is this girl with bleach blonde hair, wears double denim and a fuck you attitude that could see a Thursday night for her doing yoga or smoking 2 joints and getting into an argument about the structural integrity of The Dark Knight Rises. She's pretty fucking intense. This game is set 5 years after The Last of Us which came out in 2013, and the player controls 2 characters in a post-apocalyptic United States, and these 2 characters' lives intertwine. They're sort of told in non-parallel chronology, so you play through a period of time with one character, then you play through the same period of time with another. The 2 characters are Ellie and Abby. Ellie, who sets out for revenge after this huge tragedy, and Abby, who is a soldier who becomes involved in a conflict with a cult. Okay, so before we jump right into it and start talking about the first part of the story, which is the prologue, a brief anecdote, because as Danielle is aware, something I like to do on this show is just remind everyone that I'm human too, and I don't think that I'm above anyone. So I dredge up awful things I've done in my past by way of trying to remind you that I don't think I'm better than these people. In fact, the thing that I really care about is that these people pursue growth and change when they're making that art. So when I was 18 and single, I started messaging a girl on Tumblr. Yeah, back when Tumblr was a thing. We went back and forth for a month, and eventually she wanted to video call, so we added each other on Facebook and Snapchat or something like that. It was really flirty, and eventually it graduated to us talking all the time. She sent me a lot of explicit photos and videos, but I basically didn't return the favor. I didn't treat her as an equal. I was only interested in what I could get out of that interaction. I say this at the start of this analysis because the topic of gender and imbalance is going to come up probably a lot. I was not a good person when I was younger, and I'm still a train wreck in a lot of ways, but I've committed myself to learning and growing, and I defer to people with lived experience when it makes sense and shut the fuck up when it's not my time to speak. So we probably won't be addressing a lot of the gender politics or the discussions of queerness directly, because it's not really something I feel that I'm best placed to do. But I do just want to say I don't think I know better than Druckmann and his team, but I know a lot about storytelling. So as we break down this game, let's remember all of the context from the previous episode and this. We are not the arbiters of good story, but nothing is going to stop me from conducting valid criticism and fair criticism on this work because it's an important cultural artifact. If we don't allow these critical voices to thrive, we stifle our opportunities to tell good stories and hold power accountable. Our goal always is to be better and to make better stuff. So for this part, we're going to be discussing the game in sections chronologically. We'll probably bounce around a bit, but we'll kind of go through it, like, I guess, as the story unfolds. Before we do that, like, what are your general thoughts, but the both of you, like, going into this? Like, how, like, are you lukewarm? Did you love this game? Did you have, like, complicated feelings about it? Like, what's sort of how are we approaching this one, just from everyone's kind of side of things? And we might start with you, Sam.
Well, I guess complicated, I suppose. I feel like if I'm going to distill it down to, like on a hot to cold scale, then it's probably somewhere around lukewarm, but I feel like that doesn't fully capture it. It's a complex game and my feelings on it are complex. I think that it overall is done pretty well. It connected with me well enough, but not incredibly deeply, and I'm not going to lie, the ending kind of put a damper on it for me. I'm not a fan of that last section.
Excellent.
I don't know. It's one where it's hard for me, I feel, simply because there's a lot of... it connected really, really deeply with a lot of people and really, really turned a lot of people off. And being in the middle of that is kind of hard because I feel like I need to sort of praise it to offset... it does good stuff to offset the ridiculous nonsense, and then also like be aware of the problems it has, because I do think it has problems. But yeah, I guess Luke. Yep. But obviously, I don't feel like that does my position justice. Maybe a couple hours of talking about it. Well, we'll see.
Yeah, like it's deeply complicated. It's deeply complicated. That is exactly how I feel. I have so many conflicting thoughts about it.
Yeah. I think that if anything, having a game that we can have this many conflicting thoughts about is, a good thing. I want more games that this many people can disagree this passionately about, and that can have this complicated legacy and feeling, and but
absolutely, yeah. It would just be good if like it's also that there's a pandemic, there's nothing else coming out. Like if this had happened in a different time period, I don't know that we would be talking about this game that much. Because there was literally nothing else happening. So it was like, well, I guess we have to talk about this because there's nothing else coming out of this scale or size or merit. So like, to what extent the story has earned our kind of laboring over it and obsessing over it, and like this, what is going to be a crazy long recording for a 2-part video series for a podcast, like to what extent the game has earned that level of interest and analysis and the polarization, we'll find out. We'll find out. But what about you, Danielle?
Pretty much same with you guys, what you guys were just saying. I feel just very conflicted with the whole story. In general, I liked it. I thought it was good. I'm with Sam on the ending. The ending was just not my favorite thing in the world. I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing, but I guess we'll get there when we get there. But yeah, my feelings are just conflicted. On one hand, I think in some ways it's a masterpiece, and for the exact same reasons I think it's a masterpiece, I also think it has a lot of flaws. And so, again, I won't say anything specific just now, but yeah, I'm torn. But in general, I liked it.
It's fair. I mean, it's got dogs in it. Like, you can pat a dog at the start, but then you have to murder dogs later. So even on the dog scale, it's conflicting.
Yeah.
I'm so mad this game made me kill dogs.
I know.
I'm so mad about it. And then they fucking emotionally blackmail you later, and they're like, these dogs have names. And you're like, fucking come on, bro.
That hurts.
You play fetch with them. Yeah, it was rude.
Oh, like...
emotionally manipulative.
It's awful.
Yeah.
It's all that later.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So let's start with the prologue. So this game opens with Joel telling Tommy about Ellie and the Fireflies all those years ago. This serves as like a bit of a recap of the first game. and then the two brothers return to Jackson, and it's like kind of immediately clear. I don't know about you guys, but for me, it was immediately clear that something was up. Like that they didn't seem. Joel and Ellie didn't seem copacetic from the jump. Like there was something weird. There was this weird tone in the air.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah. So we kind of get that initial section. Also, just wanted to call out like the. We'll talk about Jackson in a second because that's where the setting for this happens. But like, they had this relationship for Joel written into the story that they cut for time, I guess. Which is something that Druckmann's talked about a lot. They had like a ton of cut content, and if anything, the game is too long. So I can't imagine what they were trying to do with all that extra shit. But it's interesting to me that like Joel isn't allowed to be sexualized. Like he can't have a relationship because there's just like not enough latitude in the narrative for it, which is kind of interesting to me. What was your vibe like with Jackson? Like how'd you all feel about it? Was it real cozy and like turn of the century, like, you know, that sort of settled West thing, or were you like, this is kind of the bit much?
Oh, I feel like the West, the Western influence was definitely there for sure. But I mean, like, as far as I could tell, really, the sort of goal of Jackson and being presented the way it was sort of to just show it as this place of relative comfort and safety in, you know, surrounded by all of this awful, dangerous stuff. And that, you know, that's pretty much the only purpose the place serves, honestly, like on a narrative level, I feel like. And I think that it, you know, it got that feeling across. So that's, but I guess also it had the element of there still being like homophobic assholes in it and stuff. So could we swear?
We'll get to that, because like this is like how long after the end of the world, and it's like really like also his issue is not, he's like, listen, because we obviously see that flashback at the end of the game, but the dude's issue is not that these two people are queer. His issue is he's like, look, do whatever you want, the privacy of your own home, but no PDAs in public, friends, unless you're straight. It's such a weird, like...
That is homophobic. You know, it's that idea
yeah.
For a straight couple to do it, but it's gross and dirty if a gay couple does it. That's...
Yeah.
Having grown up in evangelical circles, that is what it looks like oftentimes.
Yikes.
Yes.
Which does sort of tacitly imply that, like, even though this place feels quite safe, there is other stuff going on under the surface. We get, obviously, Ellie and Dina head out on patrol under sort of... So this is interesting. Like, their place in this society is fascinating to me, because what we later learn is that Ellie, Jesse, and Dina are, like, the kids of the most important people in Jackson. Like, they're like the fucking the teen titans of this community, where it's like, you know, Ellie is the daughter of Joel, and, you know, the niece of Tommy, and then, you know, Jesse's parents are like these hugely important people, which we learned at the very end of the game, and same with Dina's sister before she died. And it's just like, these are the golden children of Jackson. Like, we're hanging out with like the varsity like football team here, which I kind of like. I like that they're allowed to be this group, you know, diverse group, and they're just kind of like dumb jocks a lot of the time. These characters when they're together, yeah, it's. How did you guys feel about like the position that these like, or the way that the game positions them before we leave? Because I think it's like important scene, like set dressing, to say this is their relationship to the community before like everything that happens. Did you guys get a really strong sense for that, or would you just like blink and not even think about it?
I mean, I sort of thought about it, but I thought it seemed like, what I thought about was that they just seemed very comfortable with everybody, and like it just felt like it made it feel like a more tight-knit community, because that they were so comfortable. Like, they're saying hi to everybody in the streets.
They have like a cool snowball fight, which is fun. I really like dunking on those kids.
It's a nice little time, yeah. Like, and the kids seem to look up to them in some way in that small bit of time. But yeah, I noticed it. I didn't think about it too much, but I definitely noticed it.
Yeah, I admit it kind of flew over my head, I think. I got, you know, what Danielle was talking about sort of the comfort of their position and their relationship with people in Jackson, but that was about it. I feel like if there was a bunch of cut content from this sort of early section of the game, that maybe, I don't know, I could see a world in which The Last of Us Part 2 opens up with like a JRPG style opening with a bunch of side quests helping people out in Jackson or whatever before the...
Yeah, I thought it was weird it didn't. It seemed like a missed opportunity. Even if I don't want to add length to the game, but like it seems like an obvious thing that would help, because we get in the first game, we get that time that we spend with Joel in his like suburban perfect life before everything goes tits up. It kind of felt like this needed a bit more of that. Like them immediately going out on patrol, I was like, okay, well, like this is just we've seen this before. Like, what is the day to day like? Give me like a day in Jackson and then send me out or something.
Yeah. Though I will say that snowball fight, just to get back to that a little bit, I have to say I know it's a tropey at this point, but I am a real sucker for games that teach you how to do the combat using completely innocuous and fun and things instead of shooting things. So I just really enjoyed that, it was teaching us how to kill zombies by throwing snowballs at children. And a lot of games do that sort of thing now, but I always enjoy it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's you're throwing a snowball at a kid, which later on you'll be throwing like a bottle at a murderer who's got a shiv, who's coming to get you.
Exactly.
In the mud while you try and murder him. This game, like...
Well, can I just add real quick? I was talking about this just made me realize that I actually don't think we spent enough time in Jackson, because one of the things that I noticed as we were playing the game was that I didn't really feel like I ever knew Dina at all. Like, she never felt like a fully fleshed character to me. Somewhat with Jesse, it's not that I didn't like them. I loved both of them as characters, but I feel like there was just something missing. Where with Tess in the original game, like I felt like I truly like came to, I mean, not know her, but like felt more of a connection to her than Jesse or Dina, at least from a personal standpoint. Like I just didn't.
I agree.
Like I didn't understand the, like, because I know Dina and Ellie have a history somewhat, like they grew up together, but like I never came to really understand that, and I kind of wanted to know more about that. So that's one thing I did notice.
They try to do that later, like throughout, as you sort of go around with her in the next section, which we'll talk about in a minute. But it in the hero's journey, like this is the old world, and we needed a better sense of it, especially for a game this like that is so long, where you're just in the trenches of like this awful fucking version of like post-apocalyptic Seattle. It felt like we needed a bit more of the old world before we ventured out. But again, like I'm not keen on adding time to this game because it's too long already.
The question there gets really rough because on one hand, there's definitely a decent amount of video game story structure is just a weird thing. There's usually, and this game is no exception, a whole lot of like, oh, well, we know what the next important story point is, but we're going to spend the next few hours like getting there, and nothing else of interest is going to happen in the meantime. And that happens a lot in this game.
Yeah.
I feel like they could cut some of that down, but at the same time, if they do that, it might not give enough of a sense of time to the days in Seattle, and it gets tough. Like cutting stuff is always a really rough call, and I don't envy them having needed to do that. Maybe we'll get like a director's cut later where they just put all the stuff in and give it.
God, could you imagine?
As part 2 or something.
Can you imagine
the Snyder cut of The Last of Us? It's just Druckmann like on the ones and twos losing his mind, being like, "We're going to add in a love interest for Joel. You've got to change the ending." You're like, okay. All right. So we then, so Ellie heads out on patrol with Dina, and then we to sort of on the hunt for to relieve Joel and Tommy. We then cut to Abby, who is a really interesting character to cut to this early on. When you guys were first playing it, you first get into Abby's shoes. What did your brain do? Like, was it like, okay, this will just be like a prologue throwaway character, or did you immediately sense like, oh, this character model's quite high fidelity, she's sticking around? Like,
there was a half a second where I was like, what happened to Ellie? She looks very different.
She got shredded, man. Damn, bro.
Then I was like, oh, that's definitely not okay. Got it. I see.
Yeah. But she's out there hitting the gym.
Yeah, I wasn't really sure, honestly, what it was doing, but I was interested in it. I did pick up fairly quickly on what was going on, and that worried me. But I wasn't sure what it would be doing long term because I got it and played it early enough that I didn't know the whole split into two halves thing.
Yeah. Did you guys get exposed to any of the leaks at all? We'll talk about that in a minute. But like, was that
no?
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
I
managed to go in blind. Yeah.
I had such a I won't give you the whole rant about it or whatever, but I have such a hatred of the way that spoilers are approached on Twitter, because I know a lot of people who are just like, oh, just mute it. I muted so many things, so many terms. Some stuff still leaked through. When it came out, I was, having people, hashtag Last of Us sprawlers or something. So it was mistyped, and I couldn't, there's no way to avoid that sort of stuff if people just do it. But thankfully, I managed to this time.
You just have to not be on the internet for a bit. It's so frustrating. I mean, we went to the presser for Endgame, and that was the night before it came out. And I remember we walked out of the theater, and I was like, man, there is no way to not have this spoiled for you, because we have just seen it, which means that basically the cat's out of the bag. The second you're on the internet, that film is getting spoiled for you. And this game, when the leaks happened, we'll talk about it in a second, but the way that it happened and the way people reacted to it was really fascinating. So I don't know if you guys remember, when Skyrim was in development, there was a bunch of leaked gameplay and stuff like that from closed door conferences. And it really benefited the marketing of the game, because they didn't put out a full gameplay trailer for the first 2 years, the first 2 years of their marketing campaign. They didn't put out a gameplay trailer. It was just cinematics. Except this leaked footage was out there on the internet somewhere, and people were hunting it down ravenously. It just shows you that first dungeon that you crawl through in that game, which is Bleak Falls Barrow, I think. But they were playing that segment as a demo at behind closed doors press conferences, but only that segment. And so each time that they went and did one of these demos, someone would try and record it, and you could tell that it was live gameplay, because you would compare the different leaked videos, and you'd see that they were being played slightly differently. And it was a really, really interesting cultural artifact, because what it meant is that you immediately got the sense of this game can be approached in a lot of different ways. It's not just a marketing line. Even the guys playing it, doing the demo, are playing it 6 or 7 different ways as they go through. The leaks for The Last of Us Part 2 were kind of different, and we'll get to them when we talk about the 9 irons and the drivers in a second here. But Abby is saved from was basically Abby's booking it, right? And she is just about done. She is just about to be absorbed into this horde of terrifying zombies. And at the last minute, Tommy and Joel appear, and they manage to rescue her quite deftly. Then we cut back to Ellie and Dina, who are tracking down the now missing. Wait, so this is where I get confused. So they're not tracking down Joel. I'm trying to what's the sequence? So this is we've been on patrol with Ellie and Dina at this point. Have we been to the weed shack yet? Does that happen before Joel dies? It does, right?
It does. Yeah.
Because it's the next morning that why am I forgetting his name? That the guy comes in and is like, we don't know where Joel is. Yeah, that's right. That's so weird. Because in my head, that all happens after.
Oh, well, I must be really confused about the time. I mean, I just assumed it was within a span of hours, because I thought, but I guess that makes sense.
Yeah, I don't know if it was overnight. I think it was a shorter period of time than that, because they were just waiting for the blizzard to.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think you're right, though. Yeah.
So Joel and Tommy go back to the compound with Abby's people, and there's this really interesting scene that happens where Joel, Tommy accidentally tells them Joel's name. They're not hiding it, but he's like, I'm Tommy and this is my brother Joel. And it's just this silence in the room. Yeah. And you can tell, and then the camera hard cuts, but there's this sort of, oh, that's right, the camera doesn't hard cut. They shotgun Joel in the leg, is what happens. So they shoot Joel with a fucking shotgun.
They'll act like you heard of us or something.
Because they have.
Laura, all clear?
He's out. Put him against the wall.
Tommy! Get off me! Get off me! Puta madre.
Joel Miller.
Who are you?
Guess.
say whatever speech you got rehearsed. Get this over with.
Tourniquet his leg. Do it.
Don't you fucking move. God! Damn it!
Clear out. You stupid old man. You don't get to rush this.
And then Abby sort of is like, no, like, we're not going to make this easy for him, like, keep him alive type thing, so she can torture him. And then we hard cut back to Ellie and Dina after their night at the weed shack, which is like a very cool sequence. Also, like, what a cool old man. Like, that's kind of dope. I hope that if I live in the post-apocalypse, I become the cool, like, old the weed guy, the cool old man who's like, yeah, I got my weed shack, I'm just chilling.
As Eugene.
This is just the worst, and I hate it so much, but did you catch that one of the porn VHSs he had was called Smash Brandy's Cooch, which is
Yes. Yep.
Crash Bandicoot, and it's the
Yep.
I hate it so
Ew.
much, but it's
Ew. No, I didn't, but thank you for letting me know.
should have clarified, because I asked earlier, and I don't think it was heard, if we could swear. I don't know if that's swearing.
Yeah, I've said fuck a lot already, so you're good.
Oh yeah, that's okay. Yeah, cool.
This is a show for grown-ups. Sorry, kids. Also, and for all the kids listening, it's pretty
Why?
cool, man. Pretty cool, man. That's pretty cool, man. Stay up a bit late past your bedtime, man. That's pretty cool.
Oh no.
Now, before we kind of talk about the thing that happens, which is like the biggest, the thing that happens in this game. Just briefly wanted to touch on this sequence where Ellie and Dina are tracking down Joel.
Yeah.
And this weird thing happens where for some reason Ellie is the only one that gets there in time. So both Ellie, Dina, and Tommy split up to go like look for Joel. And Ellie magically finds this place and magically instantly knows Joel is inside. Like she just like decides, she's like, well, he must be in there, with like zero evidence. We don't see her tracking him, which I thought was like a missed opportunity to have like an interesting kind of tracking sequence through the snow or whatever. But she's just like, this story has a lot of not coincidence, but like contrivance in a lot of its plot, where like, yes, it makes sense that Abby might run into Joel and Tommy, given that they're on patrol outside Jackson, but it's fucking mighty convenient that she bumps into them and the way that she does, and she gets saved. And it's also mighty convenient that Ellie is the one that gets there first, and it's mighty convenient they don't know who she is when they capture her. And it's mighty convenient that Tommy doesn't get there till after, nor does Dina. Like, already, like, they've written themselves into this corner where they need to be like, oh yeah, it was a freak. What are the chances, guys? It's like, if you've written yourself into a hole that quickly, maybe like do another draft of that intro section, because I don't know. It's like immediately I was like, man, that's not good. That's not good. I feel like I kind of already felt from that. I was like, there's going to be some issues with this story.
Yeah, I do agree. I will say that I'm not mad about this plot point, but I do not like the plot point of Joel dying at all, to be honest, because it's just on the nose to me. Like it's like we didn't have to explore this tension with him and Ellie. We knew it would be explored, but like it just seems so on the nose about it. Like he had to die. Like I wasn't surprised that he died. And I just didn't like the sequence at all. I understand what they were doing. And I'm not saying it's bad. I just don't like that that's the avenue the story went. And because it went that way, I like it for what it is, but I don't like that they killed Joel. Like, I just don't like the plot point of that.
I might have something that disagrees here, I guess, because
Oh, okay.
I wasn't sure what direction they were going to. Honestly, I do even still, despite overall liking this game, think that The Last of Us is kind of better on its own than with a continuation. Just as a story, I think that it ended perfectly and it should have stayed there, honestly. But I like that there are consequences for Joel's actions at the end of the first game.
True.
I feel like a lot of... I feel like a lesser attempt at a continuation of this story would have just kind of ignored it. Or worse, even tried to, like, play him up as a hero for it or whatever. I appreciate the fact, I don't think it necessarily had to be his death, but it seems they wanted to, make the story about grief and anger and such as in Ellie, and so that's what they did. But I appreciate it didn't just leave that point hanging, I guess. I think that it made sense to have tangible and tragic consequences for what he did, personally.
Yeah. For some context, basically Abby has Joel captive, and Ellie arrives and she immediately gets grabbed, like instantly gets grabbed. And Abby takes a 9-iron golf club and beats Joel's skull in until he dies. And we watch the whole thing. It does not cut away. We don't get the luxury of missing this violence. We have to watch this entire scene. Now, this is the thing that was leaked before the game came out. So the fact that Joel dies was the thing that leaks. Now, if you've ever written a story or picked up a textbook about narrative, you're pretty sure that they're going to shelve Joel for this one. You're pretty confident. I'm going into this, I was like, they're either going to have to kill him or he's going to have to be off doing a mission somewhere else. He can't be the focus of this one. So it's not like it didn't thematically, that some of us didn't thematically see it coming, but this leak sparked a lot of interesting controversies. So part of my research for this is I've watched a ton of videos, commentaries. I've been doing a lot of research to try and understand the cultural context under which this game was received. And a big part of it is Joel's death being leaked made people mad about the game before they'd even played it. So they didn't know that they just knew that he was going to die, and people got furious. And a bunch of YouTube channels, when covering this, they sort of actively excused the way that Druckmann and his team were treated. There's the kinds of messages that Druckmann and his team got ranged from anti-Semitic comments to death threats. Things got really bad for a while there. And I wanted to talk about one really quickly, just to kind of flag for you guys the way this was received before the game came out, and then we can talk about sort of whether or not him dying at this point in the story makes sense. So the video that I singled out as being possibly the worst take of all time on this is from this channel called Just Some Guy, and his YouTube his YouTube icon is it's an anime dude with a Daredevil mask on his head. And the second that a YouTube channel is not using someone's face or is avoiding self-identifying, they're going to say some pretty fucking heinous shit. And this dude we'll jump onto the watch together in a second. I'll play you a little bit of a clip of his video. But he's a great example that typifies the way that a lot of the media, I'm going to call them media critics, but they're really just white guys yelling at their computers. Where in this discussion about Druckmann being upset. So Druckmann is on the Kind of Funny Games podcast talking about that he's upset about the leak. So he's upset that it leaked because it's the biggest twist of this game. And it would have been really great if it could have been experienced by people in the game, right? That's what he's talking about. And this dude, Just Some Guy, this YouTuber, basically strawmans an entire conversation to prove that Druckmann is this, that he deliberately did this to piss people off, and then he's whinging because people got upset about it. That's the way this is framed. So I'm just going to hop across to that watch together. We'll just listen to a little bit of this guy's awful take. Here we go.
Jedi. Plenty of time to see this coming. People have waited for 7 years to see Joel again. You take a beloved character we waited for forever to see and have him killed in a brutal fashion in the first 3 hours of the game by someone he rescues multiple times. I have astigmatism in both eyes. I'm damn near blind and I could see that shit coming. You had to know this would be the reaction. There's no way you couldn't, and you admit this later on in the live stream.
One is like we saw, okay, the scene works. On one level, it's like it did what it meant to do. It's like now we have to wait until they see the rest of it to see if the rest of it works.
So the scene was meant to get a visceral emotional reaction from gamers, one of pure anger, sadness, and hatred, and you got that. But now you're complaining because gamers reacted the way you wanted?
Now, he's about to say some pretty heinous shit, so just fair warning. He's basically going to justify people sending Druckmann death threats. And then it gets worse.
That doesn't make any sense. Obviously, they would be pissed at Abby, at Naughty Dog, and at you. You admit this is what you wanted, so what's the problem? You knew they'd be angry. What else did you think would happen? And then he says...
Right, we've never shied away from the fact that we said there's going to be fans of the first game that don't like this game. And this is the reason why. Because we killed Joel in this fashion. So we knew that going in.
Then why are you bitching? If you knew people would hate the game, not just Abby, not just you, but literally hate the game and not want to play it anymore, if you knew this going in, why are you bitching about it? This is a serious question. So if you see this video, leave a comment explaining why you have a problem with people reacting exactly how you knew they would react. I have another question though. If you knew people would hate the game if you killed Joel in this manner, why do it? Why not rewrite the scene so Joel's death is less infuriating? Why do it this way knowing half the gamers wouldn't like it?
Yeah, change your story for your audience.
Was it a lack of better ideas? Did you really think it was so cool that even people who hated it would just let it go?
The thing that was hard to see is then people kind of like dug their heels in the sand and took this position, be like, I already hate this game. No amount of context is going to change it for me.
Context? Context.
Oh,
Dude,
here you go.
killed off a beloved character in the most gruesome, pointless way possible. You're over here talking about, what about the context? It doesn't matter what the context is. Here, since you're having so much trouble wrapping your head around this, imagine this. The gamers are Abby, and Joel
Are you
is
ready for
Abby's
this?
dad.
Oh,
Now
yeah.
you get it? Abby doesn't give a flying fuck why Joel killed her father. It doesn't matter what his reasons were. It doesn't matter what the context is. He killed her father. End of discussion. This is the same thing. People love Joel. They see him as a flawed father figure, and you murder him in a brutal way for really no good reason narratively. It doesn't matter why Abby does it because we're not invested in her. We don't know the character. We don't care about the character. We care about Joel, and you killed him. You can't try to get us to care about her after the fact. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah, it does
not
though.
In fiction and not in real life. What you did was the equivalent of having someone rape a child and then try to explain why they did it. I don't care. I don't care what in life the character.
So this is the point I wanted to get to. This is a human person said this and put it on the internet.
You care about Joel and you killed him. You can't try to get us to care about her after the fact. It doesn't work that way. Not in fiction and not in real life. What you did was the equivalent of having someone rape a child and then try to explain why they did it. I don't care. I don't care.
Yeah, you guys know how when you
No.
what the it's just it's so much mental gymnastics that these people do.
How could you even make that comparison?
Can I one, I am so tired of these shitty internet men comparing everything they don't like to rape.
Right.
It's extremely gross. But aside from that, he's comparing it he's using it as a comparison to murder. Murder's already bad. You don't have to do that.
Also, this is a story, guy. It's a story. It doesn't chill the fuck out.
Yeah.
But
That's
the worst part about it.
I could talk about this for the entire.
Dude, bonus episode of us just watching. His channel's great. I highly recommend you go and have a look at some of his other stuff. He really doesn't like The Last Jedi. That's going to give you an indication of his kind of politics.
No, I assumed so. That's I think that's the source that I've heard most other comparisons to rape in is when people talk about The Last Jedi and how bad it is. So
Yikes!
Not surprised.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
It's just it's a lot. The annoying thing is the premise of his argument is just so fundamentally incorrect that you can't really argue with these people because they present this. What they do is they present their response to this argument that was never made. So it's like classic straw manning. And then they draw a conclusion and present it as ontological fact. And they're like, you did this, therefore this, and I said this, therefore this is how it is.
Right.
Like the sentence of like, oh, well, you can't get us to feel about it can't get us to like her after the fact. Yeah, you can. That's the game. That's the
literally
game,
the
dude.
game. Yeah.
Old empathy, man. Like, you know how other people exist?
Okay. Sorry, go ahead, Sam.
You can go ahead, Danielle. I don't want to say it. I don't want to, so you can go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So I want to bring this up now because it seems to fit, but I want to read to you one of the notes that I found with Dina and Ellie before they find Joel. It's at the grocery store, and they're about to kill some infected. And the note says this. It says, "Ma'am, I'm sorry to God for what I did. I wasn't going to hurt you. I didn't want anything from your store except for the drugs. Your husband came at me. What choice did I have? My little sister stopped feeling her feet. I needed the insulin. Everyone is hoarding the stuff. What choice did I have? I hope he survives. I'm sorry." And I feel like that note is interesting in the context of the whole game because it's all about just this cycle of violence that occurs, which is literally the game.
Is it though?
Well,
okay.
I know we could
saying it is.
Yeah, we could discuss that further. I said it half-heartedly, but it's there. I feel, but we'll get into that. But
that feels like a statement from them being like, "This is how we think." Like that's them communicating to you, the audience, like them saying to you, Danielle, they're like, "This is what we think violence is."
Yeah.
It's like, well, I don't have a choice, and it's sort of the game.
Right.
Yeah.
But my point, yeah.
It's complicated. We'll talk about it a lot, I'm sure.
Yeah, and the only reason I bring that up is because this guy's saying well, how will we change our mind? That's literally the point of the game. Like when you get to the end of it, that's literally the point. But
that's what Druckmann was talking. That's literally the argument Druckmann makes. He's like, the reason I didn't want it to leak is so that you have to make your mind up as you play the game.
Right.
Like you don't come into it preloaded, already ready to hate it.
Right.
And then this dude is like, well, you killing him means that we were going to hate it anyway. No, what he's saying is the fact that it leaked is the issue, not the thing that happened. But and then he's just creating this universe where Druckmann is on a press podcast recording with a small to medium-sized YouTube channel that have incredible funding that are owned by Rooster Teeth, talking about the product that they made and the struggles with people sending them death threats, actual death threats to these people saying, "I'm going to kill you because you hurt a fictional character." And this dude is turning around and saying, "Yeah, well, they kind of have a point. You shouldn't have killed him." It's like, fam. And then he compares it to rape, child rape even. It's just this.
Yeah.
I hate so much that, and he tries to address this later with the whole, the context doesn't matter. But the fact is that there is a difference between doing something in a story in order to set up the story and create an emotional response and knowing that it will create an emotional response and people finding out that the thing that upsets them will happen in the story. The experience of playing this game and having that happen is completely different from hearing, "Oh, well, Joel's going to die." The completely different. So, Druckmann did intend absolutely for there to be an emotional response to it, but because it's experienced, it's such a different thing, and he's just kind of treating it like it's not, and even if it was, it wouldn't matter.
But that's part of games journalism, though, I find today, at least with a lot of games, where it's just, I didn't like it, it made me feel bad, so it's bad.
Bad thing happened I didn't like. The thing I always talk about when trying to address this particular weird discussion of people that just don't and shouldn't be able to do media criticism because they just aren't equipped. The thing I talk about a lot is Mad Men, where when Mad Men was first airing, it was huge. It was just massive. And if you went up to someone at work and you were like, "Oh, did you see Mad Men?" They're like, "Yeah." And you go, "Can you believe this episode, Pete said, 'I know who you are.'" And you're like the thing that's the only thing that happens in that episode. But it's about how you get there. Every Mad Men episode can be summed up in one sentence of Pete found out, Don's true identity. But that's not the thing that matters. The thing that matters is how you get there and the experience of finding it out and the experience of how it unfolds. And that show is all in the subtext of what's happening on screen and the acting and the performance and the directing and the precision of that show. but like just telling someone what happened does not even compare to the experience of going through it. And so when you talk about a video game like this, where it's like the argument that the context doesn't matter comes immediately after him explaining the context for why he's upset. So the context does matter because you're upset that Joel's dead because you know him from the first game. So either it does matter or it doesn't. Like, it's just...
Said that right after he said it was in the most pointless way possible too. Like to one moment just be all like it meant nothing, and then to say the meaning didn't matter. Like clearly, I feel like
it's just fucking bizarre.
By the way, it's 46 minutes. I don't know if you want to.
It's time for some advertising. time to wrap your ears around this amazing thing, whatever that ad insert will be. Enjoy.
Hello audience, I'm Patrick and I run a film analysis podcast alongside my co-host Mitchie called A Method to the Madness. If you like the stuff at ZeroIndent, then you'll probably like the stuff that we produce, so go check us out if you're interested. Thanks.
And we're back. So let's move on from that heinous shit show and talk a bit about day one. Because I don't want to linger too much on what could be the worst take on the internet. So day one, basically what happens is Joel gets absolutely murked, and Ellie and Dina go to the leader of the community, who is Tommy's wife, because again, these are the most blessed kids in Jackson. And she gives them her blessing to go to Seattle because Tommy has in fact already left. He's already left to go and get his own slice of revenge pie. And you and Dina are going to go there and I guess save him, but also you know for sure that Ellie's there to murder the people involved.
Yeah. I hate Tommy, I'm not going to lie, even before the ending.
Can I ask you both something? Like, do you think Tommy is true to his actual character in this game? Like, that was set up in the first game?
Well, this is an argument I make a lot with this game. Is like, no, but that's because it's been a number of years and he's completely changed as a human because it's been like 10 years.
Also, so honestly, I feel like I didn't get to know Tommy too well. I mean, it's been a while since I played The Last of Us, but I didn't get to know him too incredibly well. Like,
yeah. I'm torn about it. That's why I'm asking, because I just feel like there's like so we don't get to know him that well, but like sort of fundamental beliefs on his part. You know, he talks to Joel about the things that they did before they parted ways in the first game.
Yeah, what the fuck things are they like? I know Joel was a smuggler. What is he talking about? Like,
I actually don't know.
We never get that context. Yeah,
but my point in saying that is this: it just feels strange. And you're right. Like, obviously, a person changes within that time, so that's kind of where I fall back on. I just don't know, but he just doesn't feel true to character, and he never really did in this game. Not a criticism, it's just something I noticed. So I was wondering if you guys noticed it, but
I think it's mostly between the time pass as well as the fact that one of the game's sort of main things is that giving in to grief and anger can change a person quite a bit.
True.
Yeah, he's like a fucking shell of a person at the end of this.
Yeah.
Like, it's rough. Man, it's rough for Tommy.
I don't even care about the
yeah.
Amazing. So Ellie and Dina set out. They teleport to Seattle. It's one of the few time skips this game does, and I really thought they were going to make me fucking play the journey. I really did. Seattle is like capital F fucked in this world, and they're basically searching through this kind of mini, like little open world, like, you know, city block to try and work out where Tommy's gone because they need to get some fuel to get through a gate or something like that. Yeah. And it's this like kind of cool little semi-open world. Like, you kind of can go around and do whatever you want in this space in whatever order you want, which really surprised me. I thought the whole game, like, it really took me left to field when this happened because I was like, oh, this is like completely different for them.
I think my favorite part of the game.
Same.
Which honestly, I'm kind of down on open world like segments and structures and stuff. I'm kind of tired of them and just want more cool linear controlled story stuff. But I would love an entire game of just hanging out with this cool lesbian couple as they travel and walk around and talk about stuff and get to know each other. Like I want that game.
Just like kicking it with your girlfriend in the post-apocalypse, exploring a city. I'm hella down for that.
That would be amazing.
It's so chill. And they have such an interesting rapport where like I think because also they were best friends before they got together. It's really interesting, like that they have this history, but they're also still learning about each other. Which does bring us to the synagogue.
Oh yeah.
Which so in this section, you have the option to go into this like kind of fucked looking building on the outside that turns out to be this pretty big synagogue. It's like an oddly structured little play space, just like the visual space is quite weird. But this is like where I wanted to talk about an issue or a thing this game does a lot, where it introduces a concept, which in this case is Dina's Jewishness. And then immediately, like, it's all we talk about for the next, like, 20 minutes in the game. Like, it's all the game focuses on. It's like, let me tell you everything about this new bit, and then we're never going to address it again. And it's like this intensity or this, like, density to new ideas. Like, we even see a fucking Torah. Like, it goes a bit far. The rest of it I'm pretty fine with. But the game does this all the time where it's like, oh, here's a new idea. It's just going to be that. It's all you're going to be thinking about. And then we're going to immediately move on and never revisit it. And it does that a lot. Did you guys notice that when you were playing through?
Honestly, I didn't. I felt like when you're getting to know someone, that's often how it goes. You know, you find out someone's Jewish and you're like, oh, what's that? Because, Ellie wasn't before at all and probably hasn't had much experience with it since everything went to hell. I feel like it makes sense that she would then get to know her girlfriend in this way and ask her questions and talk about it. I don't know. Honestly, it did not feel all that unnatural to me, and I thought it was kind of nice to get a feel for someone's religious and spiritual life in a video game. That's not an aspect of characters that we see too often in this medium. So I don't know. I didn't get that sense at all. Personally,
I don't disagree. My issue is more like it never comes up again.
I mean,
like it's never addressed, despite the fact that the rest of the game is so preoccupied with belief in religion and like the Seraphite. Like it's weird that it isn't ever. I don't know.
Yeah, I agree. Like, kind of with both of you. Like, I agree. Naughty Dog kind of goes all in and then kind of pulls back rapidly, and then never brings it up. But at the same time, I didn't mind the segment. I thought it was nice. But and like Sam kind of alluded to, I like that they brought up religion in the game, just because. You're right. They don't talk about it that much in games. I do wish, though, with the whole Seraphite stuff, it would have been interesting to contrast that. But again, the game was going for so much and doing so much. I guess it's just.
Did Dina ever have any interaction with the Seraphites? I feel like those two things never intersected at all.
Actually, you're right. Yeah, I don't think she does. You're right. So
seems like a huge missed opportunity.
I mean,
yeah. I guess it's part of that whole open world segment in the first place, and there's a lot of stuff there that's just us finding about the characters.
True.
And this is a weird thing for me to say, because like I'm the guy who hates the Lord of the Rings books because of all their random detours that don't mean anything. But I think it's kind of nice that we got all of just these little details about these characters, even if they don't matter. I enjoyed that, I guess, personally.
But
I also enjoy the subtlety of them. Yeah, well, it's also just nice, like hanging out with them,
right,
like as they get to know each other a bit better. Like it feels quite like organic, I guess. The way it's written, and again, like the acting in this game is like phenomenal.
It's really good. Yeah,
they do so much with so little when it comes to the acting. Like, I mean, and we'll talk about it when we get to like some of the Ellie stuff as the game progresses. But like, she's a very terse character, so a lot of what this game relies on is you reading into her silences and her like lack of emoting and stuff like that. But this section works really well for me because it's clear that she's A, genuinely interested in the religious stuff, but B, like is also genuinely interested in Dina, and it just like feels very natural. It just would have been good if like they dialed back the Jewish theme park a tiny bit, like just a little bit.
Well,
as a side note for sorry, no, you go ahead.
I was just gonna say I like this segment a lot. Like to move aside from that just for a second, like that I loved the open world. It made me think of Lost Legacy, Uncharted Lost Legacy.
Yeah. Gonna bring up so
yeah. Oh, there you go. Yeah, I absolutely loved it. It was my favorite part of the game. So
that bank is fucking cool, but scared the shit out of me.
Well, there's an Uncharted reference in that actually.
Oh, is there?
Yeah, if you find it in one of the safes that you have to open, like the actual safe you have to open, there is the ring that I forget what it says now. It's like Nathan Drake's ring. alluding that maybe he robbed the bank. I don't know.
Yeah. Is he famous for robbing banks?
No. Well, robbing things, so yeah.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. At least it seems to me that since The Last of Us, there's something of a progression that you can see in the games that Naughty Dog makes. Like Crash Bandicoot to Jak and Daxter to Uncharted, like there's similarities but a lot of differences as they go. But you can see The Last of Us sort of try this more focused and emotionally centered narrative experience that they then clearly learned a lot from when they made Uncharted 4. And then you get the Lost Legacy sort of experimenting with some of these open world elements, and then you see that sort of brought into The Last of Us Part 2. I feel like there's a bit of a discernible flow to what they're doing and how it affects their next work that I just kind of enjoy. I've been playing their games since Crash Bandicoot on the PS1, so it's
Nice.
You're a lifer. Yeah. So we get from that little section then to Ellie and Dina narrowly avoid a WLF ambush. And this is sort of where we get our first introduction to WLF, which are the Washington Liberation Front.
Yeah.
Who is sort of this like, they're presented as not even like, not fascists at this point. We'll get to them when we talk about Abby. We get to her sections, but like at this stage, it's really unclear what they represent, and that makes them kind of like pretty intimidating. But during this kerfuffle, Ellie and Dina kind of book it through a subway that has a lot of spores in it, and through this kind of situation of trying to escape these zombies, Ellie's mask is broken, and Dina naturally panics and is like, "Well, shit! The only way that let's share my mask." She's like trying to take it off and give it to Ellie, and Ellie is sort of forced to once again like reveal that she's immune. But this time Dina buys it, because if you'll recall, when we're in the weed den, she thinks that Ellie's kidding, or that like Ellie's messing with her. But this time she obviously sees that Ellie isn't dying from the spores. And then Dina has this reveal of her own, which is that she's pregnant. How did you guys feel about this sequence?
You go first, Sam.
I will preface it with something similar to what you prefaced this whole thing with, that as a dude, I'm not necessarily the one to make the final call on how like pregnancy is or should be used in things like this. But I will say, at first I was like optimistic, because it seemed like the plot point could be used in sort of a variety of ways, and I was hoping that it would just, because it does serve as a legitimate complication to what's going on. And at the same time, as I was playing it, my partner was with me, and she was expressing concern that it might be that it was basically trying to do a like, oh well, now it would be even worse if she died, because there's a baby there too, like a way to give her value than it already just had as a woman. And I was like, oh, I don't know. Later on with Mel and stuff, I feel like that is kind of something the game dabbles in, and I'm not incredibly comfy about that. But I don't know. I don't think that this plot point in particular is necessarily a bad thing. I think that it's sort of function as a way to make the journey a little more complicated with regards to Dina's safety is legitimate, but I feel like it could have been I feel like there are some problems that they didn't write around very well.
Yeah, and it's also just like another kind of coincidence that like this complication with her being pregnant has nothing to do with them going to Seattle. Like, it's nothing that they've done that's progressively complicated the story. They've just like added in another detail that happens to be happening at the same time. And it's about this point in the game where I started to get suspicious that this was just the way that they write now, where they're like, oh yeah, she's also pregnant, because that will make it harder, instead of doing the hard work of being like, how could we reasonably make this like a more complicated narrative that is like, they do a thing and then the consequence of that progressively complicates the story. Instead, they're just like, I don't know, here's something unrelated, I guess. It just, I don't know. It was when I was starting to get a little bit sus that there was maybe something in this story that wasn't going to click with me. And I think that was when it started. It was in that subway.
I like the scene too, in terms of her being pregnant. I didn't love this storyline, but I don't dislike it either. It just seems like another thing where I'm just kind of meh about it. Like, I'm okay with it. I go along with it. But something just rubbed me the wrong way about it. It just seemed like a way to get rid of Dina for a while. And I liked having Dina. And I liked Jesse too, obviously, but like, it would be cool to have the three of them together. Like, I just feel like it was a plot point that just didn't need to be there. And another thing I should add too is that before she revealed that she was pregnant, they're putting like signs that she is weaker when they're getting out of, I guess it's the subway. Like Ellie has to kind of care or like help her to the movie theater. And I thought to myself, that's interesting, because this game often, we see people get injured, but we don't see them like really tired necessarily. And that's kind of something that I feel like just games don't do. They don't talk about like people like, you need to take a nap, like go to bed for a little while. Like, yeah. And I kind of liked that. I was like, oh, they're actually showing somebody who has ran around all day and would be legitimately exhausted right now. And then they said she was pregnant, and I'm like, oh, that's why. All right. Yeah. I mean, yeah, whatever. Right?
Yeah. It's also like in Ellie's journal, she talks about how Dina's been like sick a lot in the mornings, but like, so like there's some other signs that point to it as well.
Well, she feels sick at the dead horses, I think, at some point.
Yeah, which is like a natural thing to feel.
Right, exactly. So it's like, yeah.
Obviously, the next thing that happens is Ellie gets a list of all of Abby's friends. In the weirdest, like, coincidence of all time, they happen to find a guy who just has Polaroids of every one of the people that were there that evening in the ski lodge. And Dina's like, well, what's the plan here? Like, what are you going to do? And Ellie's like, well, like, old mate Tommy is going after them. So I'll follow in his footsteps, and I'll make him talk. I'll make him tell me where Abby is. And this seems to be, for the most part, like Dina seems okay with this answer initially. There is some awkwardness when they get to the theater as well, where Ellie doesn't really know how to process this information about that Dina is pregnant. And they do a really good, smart thing where she doesn't really react to it immediately. She just kind of like wanders off and is just like kind of a little bit spaced out and confused, which is like absolutely the way that you'd react to that news.
Yeah.
And that's sort of day one. It puts us in the theater. We have this kind of base of operations, where we're then going to kind of have that cinema be HQ for the next 2 days. So the next morning, Ellie goes off to Tommy alone. Dina is like too pregnant or whatever, or tired or something. And on her hunt for Nora, Ellie stumbles into Jesse, who actually followed them from Seattle. That section, I kind of like the section before you meet Jesse. Like, it's pretty bleak. It's kind of, I liked playing just as Ellie for just briefly, because this game does a lot of like, here's a companion. I kind of like that you had some quietness with Ellie for a while. We skimmed over the horse dying, which hurt my feelings. Yeah.
I knew it would probably happen at some point, but I'm still sad about it.
It scared me.
I was like, please don't kill the horse. Yeah. Oh yeah, it comes out of nowhere, that explosion.
I was just waiting for it, honestly, and it came, and I'm like, yep. Why am I not surprised? But I still jumped.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, I jumped both times, the first time and the second time, even knowing the jump was coming.
What's the horse's name? It was something cute, I feel like.
It was Shimmer, I think.
Shimmer, yeah.
Yeah, it's a good name.
Pony character or something.
Yeah.
Except they don't die.
Yeah, except they don't die.
Yeah, well, exactly. So this like other thing happens where I want to like try and talk about this in a way that makes sense, where the game story seems to be like the way that it identifies people is like preoccupied with pain as like the primary identifier. Like for the most part, the people in Jackson like are identified by like what has like how or what is hurting them. Like to an extent, like Dina's Jewishness is about being a survivor. Like she talks about that a lot in that section. Ellie's queerness is about being a victim of prejudice in Jackson. Joel's parenthood is about losing Sarah. Tommy's brotherhood is about the agony of Joel's choices. The only person who's really allowed to have an identity unrelated to grief is Jesse. But I think in the most part, that's because like Jesse is more of a side prop a primary character. And they also, interestingly, like they never address his ethnicity at all. He's just allowed to be this like cool Chad dude who just seems nice. But it's like, I don't know if it's I don't know what Druckmann believes about this stuff, but he seems to think that like people are exclusively defined by their pain in some ways. Is that a sense you guys got, or like is it something you've thought about?
I can't say I did, but I see what you're saying. I think obviously writing a well-rounded character is a difficult thing to do, but yeah, it's definitely there. And I think I didn't have the words for it, but now that you're saying it, yeah, it's definitely a bit of an issue. But
it's just weird. Like it's just weird that that's how you would identify your characters.
I feel like it's essentially I feel like there's a degree to which characters, just generally speaking, can be identified on sort of a sliding scale from whether they're meant to be sort of archetypes or fully fleshed out people. And both can, archetypes aren't necessarily a bad thing. Both can work in different contexts in different ways. But the main thing is that these games, and this one in particular, are sort of made to give you fleshed out characters rather than archetypes, but it also is still dealing with a very central theme. I would think that identifying most of these characters by their pain is essentially an attempt at thematic consistency, because that is essentially what this story is about. So it makes sense that you would want a lot of your major characters to have this as sort of a central theme. And then, of course, add The Last of Us's whole, like, everything is kind of defined by violence. It's how we respond to things, so that's what we're going to do elements. And it's sort of, I can definitely see that as sort of an obstacle to seeing all of these people as fleshed out people, though. But I definitely would think that the idea here is to keep the characters with a degree of, to keep each of them relating to the game's main themes to one degree or another.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, that makes sense. It's to what extent that becomes, like, to what extent that eclipses the things the story is trying to do. Because, like, it's thematically consistent, but the whole point of, like, the way that this story approaches these topics is, like, it wants to explore, like, the complexity of, like, wanting to kill someone. And what we haven't really talked about, like, the underlying, like, the philosophy of this. We might talk about it before we jump to Abby. But, like, this weird thing where whatever, like, is unique about you or different about you has to be defined through pain is just, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just odd. Like, yes, like, Ellie's queerness is about being the victim of prejudice, but it's also, like, a ton of other things. Like, Joel's parenthood is, about losing Sarah, but it's also about a ton of other stuff. And it just, I kind of, they do it better in the second half of the game with Abby and her, like, kind of accoutrement of friends and allies. They do it way better there. But in this first half, everyone in Jackson, like, they kind of get reduced to, like, whatever trauma is so central to their character. And it's just odd to me. So it's, halves actually makes a lot of sense, if only because this first half is essentially, to I would say not insignificant degree, about Ellie's self, the entirety of who she is, being sort of reduced down to this one point that she's obsessing over, whereas the entire point of Abby's arc is, hey, these people you hate because they killed Jill, they're people too. And it seems like first half is sort of about reducing people down to things, and then the second half is about broadening your understanding of them. Whether that necessarily means that this is, like, a good choice, whether it works is but it's definitely what they're going for.
I think it makes sense that the two halves would differ in that way.
Definitely. Absolutely. And so what we then see is Ellie catches up with Nora at the hospital. The game makes me kill dogs, and I'm very upset about it. And if you stealth a guy, like, if you shoot a guy with an arrow, the dog will like go over to his body and, like, pawn over it and cry. It's very upsetting. And then I have to kill the dog. And the dog will, like, go away or stop caring, and then the dog was just sad, and I was like, oh no, that's worse. It's worse. The dog's like, no, and I'm like, now I have to kill you, dog. It sucks. Ellie does catch up to Nora, though, and we get this, like, very intense moment with Ellie where she chases Nora through the hospital, manages to kind of isolate her in a room, and the game makes me beat her skull in with a pipe, I have to press the square button to do it. There's no option. I put the controller down at this point, and I was like, I'm not doing that. And the game's like, nah, fuck you, pal. You got to do it. And I did. I beat Nora's skull in. And you learn, or Ellie learns rather, that the aquarium is where she needs to head next. How did you guys feel about this sequence, getting through the hospital and then extracting this information from Nora?
I mean, I liked the sequence in the sense that I like this sort of exploration of seeing Ellie's rage and the lengths that she will go to, and how it sort of is sort of the results of living really in this world, and the constant violence that she has experienced throughout her life that kind of has brought her to this, like that she thinks this is the only way to deal with this. Seeing her so like angrily beating Nora is so difficult to watch, but also makes so much sense that like I enjoyed the sequence even though I didn't enjoy the actual action of pressing square. In regards to the aquarium stuff, I think my thoughts on that were just like, all right, let's do this. Like, I think I was getting tired at this point. Not like with the game, like I was enjoying it, but I was just tired and I wanted to come to a head with Abby.
You feel Ellie's done with it.
Like, yeah, I was ready. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, look, a thing that this game never seems to know what it wants to do with is whether or not violence is like structural or personal. It presents violence as being structural, where it goes, okay, like the reason that the WLF and the Seraphites are fighting is for like structural and societal reasons. But also the guy in charge of the WLF has personal reasons for wanting to fight the Seraphites. And Ellie's revenge quest for Abby is structural because the world has made her like this, but also it's almost exclusively personal because Abby killed Ellie's dad. And Abby is on the hunt for Ellie because Ellie killed her friends. And Abby is on the hunt for Joel because Joel killed her dad, which is a personal reason, even though it's presented as being structural. And like, I don't think Druckmann doesn't seem to like understand or have the ability in his text to articulate what structural violence actually means. Everything has to be personal for him. And it's like a thing that he's always done in his writing. When he talks about the inspiration for this game and the idea of this revenge quest, he talks about seeing a video that, I'll see if I can find it in my notes here. So this is from a VG 24/7 article where Druckmann's talking about the inspiration. And this is from the article, quote, "I don't want to go into specifics about it, but I saw a video of a lynching when I was much younger," Druckmann said in a GQ interview. "It was like an actual news thing. And then feeling this intense hatred for the people that committed the lynching, and then thinking, like, oh man, if only I could hurt these people in some horrible ways, then I could," end quote. And he talks a lot in that article and in the interviews since about this idea of like universal hatred that is the foundation for the game. And like, I just don't feel that. Like, I don't have, like, I don't see something bad happen and then I'm like, I better go fucking murder someone. Like, it's just not my reaction. And so I think in some ways, like when it comes to discussing like to what extent the ending works, which we'll get to after we kind of muddle through the Abby stuff, it's tricky because it only really works if you come at this game with the underlying assumption that hatred is like the default state, which is just like not for most people. And even in this game, it's not for most people. It's so weird. It's like, do you think the violence is structural and is caused by the structures, and therefore it's up to like personal growth and work to overcome those structures and not do the violence? Or is it personal because you killed your dad and you need to get over it and not murder her back because it's just gonna, because like she killed your dad, so you know you kill her dad, like eye for an eye type thing, which is a very personal way of looking at the world. It just never seems to decide, in my opinion, like which it thinks is the cause, and just squints at it the whole time and is like, I don't know, you'll read into it, we're not going to worry about it, we don't need to try and isolate it. And that scene with Nora was when I was like, particularly this time playing through, it really solidified like how gruesome that scene is. I really enjoy the way it's put together. It's really confronting. but it's like, what's it in service of at that point? I guess to prove that Ellie's like fucking
Unhinged.
super furious and unhinged and crazy, right?
Which
But then
Ellie does that just unquestionably brutal, and I guess not necessarily like she hadn't necessarily up to this point had to inflict that degree and that type, that like as hateful of that violence on anyone yet.
Mhm.
Like the one dude that she'd come across before now got shot by someone else, like, or no, not shot. What happened? I forget exactly. Like she didn't have to kill him.
Tommy tortured them to death, I think.
Oh,
yeah. Like I think that it's basically a turning point for her character, which is also treated as, you know, in the scene afterwards, which I think is an incredibly important like companion to this. You can't have this scene without the scene where she goes back and is grappling with what she did, and Dina is caring for stuff like that.
Yeah.
I also will just admit I am personally a sucker for games making me do things I don't want to.
Yeah.
It's one of my favorite tropes, like all the way back to Shadow of the Colossus and stuff. Like I love it. And I also love that the scene didn't show the beating the character with a pipe. It showed Ellie. It showed her face, her response to it the whole time. I don't know. I think that it worked, but I can see how it could be sort of a focal point of what you're saying about the game's, you know, personal versus structural violence. The apples, no, that's where my mic is. I'm sorry, my cat's trying to go where my mic is.
Apples, that's amazing. That's the
a good
best
cat
name.
She's the best cat. So
I'm so what you're talking about actually has me thinking like about why, like, because Sam, you said earlier in the show, like you were talking about Joel's death and how like you wanted repercussions for what he did in the first game, and I agree with you. And I think that when I think about Joel's death and I think of why I dislike the whole plot point of it all, I think that it just, now going to what David said about making like the violence personal and just how Abby like just happened to run into Joel and Tommy and was able to murder them, and this is just what people do in this universe. I think that's where I take issue. Like, I want Joel to have repercussions for his actions. I just don't like, I wish it was a bit more nuanced in the way they went about it. And I think that's what David, what you're kind of saying is making me think about that more. Like this personal versus the results of the world. Like, it's, I don't even know what I'm saying anymore.
I do feel like I now need to specify that I'm not saying I want Joel to suffer, just that actions have consequences. Doing bad things, you know, inevitably hurts people, and then there are consequences from that. And I just think it's good that those manifested one way or another. Not that I think that Joel should have been killed or deserved it or whatever. But I realized that as you said that in this context, I was like, I could see how that would be read like that, and I don't want to do that. But yeah, I agree. I just about the overall, like, I feel like the story is like the characters are largely defined by violence and the violent nature of the world they're in, but that the story is about them, not that world. And I feel like the sort of inclusion of both, but focus pretty much only on one, definitely does have. I can see where you're coming from on that for sure.
Yeah, it's just like especially given the kind of year this has been. It's just like I'm like, I know that they can't go back and change it, but it's like this stuff isn't personal, man. Like, it's structural. Like, it's frustrating too, knowing his history and where he comes from. It's like the Israel-Palestine conflict isn't because like someone killed someone's dad. Like, it's structural. It's like foundational. Like. It's so frustrating because it's like I fucking love that. I love that sequence of you go from the hospital and you have just this shell-shocked Ellie trying to grapple with what's just happened. But again, it's personal. It's like, well, how does this affect Ellie? And it's like, yeah, I get it. She's the protagonist currently. But also, like, what does it say about the fabric of this world that she is able to do this and still feels guilty? Are we ever going to explore that? No. Is there ever going to be a discussion about how she's taken this structural injustice and made it into a personal one? Absolutely not. Are we ever going to actually talk about violence in the story? No. We're just going to allude to it because it's too fucking hard. And this is just like a gripe I have with Druckmann's writing in general, is that if you're going to make the story about this thing, you have to make it about the thing. And even though thematically in the first act, or the first half at least, everything is aligned to be about pain and like grief and things like that, it's never like, there's never an addressal of it in the text, even in the prologue, it's just like, I don't know, look listlessly slightly past the DP's shoulder into the horizon, Ellie. That's how we know that you'll be feeling feelings. Like, there's never a conversation about it. And that just, it bothered me, because that's the first thing that would go in the rewrite. It's like, okay, well, these characters need to have a discussion about this. Maybe not now, maybe not in the shell-shocked moment, but at some point it would behoove us to address it in the text. And it just like never really happens. But also on what you were saying before, Sam, it's weird that the reason Joel is killed is not the structural reason of him taking away the cure. It's because he killed Abby's dad. And that's just weird. Like, I just was expecting like her to be like just somebody at the hospital who was like, man, this guy's a psycho. He cost us a chance at saving humanity. I'm going to go and do the thing that society should do, which is like exact some kind of revenge or exact some justice here. But it's not that. It's personal. It's, well, he killed my dad. I'm like, I get it. But why have, and I know it's the mirroring, it's the doubling. Oh, well, he killed my dad, so I killed your dad. It's like, yeah, cool, man. But like, that has nothing to do with the reason why Joel needs to be punished. Joel needs to be punished not because he killed her dad, but because of because he killed all those people and rid the world of that opportunity. Like, it's not about her dad, and yet the text insists it is.
But I would argue that it's not necessarily that the text insists that it is about her dad. It's that the story is about people who lose perspective because of grief. We miss seeing that develop in Abby. We just sort of see it happen, see the result of it, and then see the beginning of it later, and then see her sort of try and grow past the point where that's what defines her. But that is pretty much the entire process of what we see with Ellie, is reducing the entire world down to her own pain and then acting based on that instead of based on these systems and based on the larger things that happened. I feel like not necessarily that the game is saying the cure didn't matter, it's all about Abby's dad, but it's talking about these people who lose perspective and center the everything around themselves and their own pain and cause more pain as a result of it. That definitely, breaks out of the structural stuff in the first place, but like we've been talking about, how the story itself doesn't really address that. I feel like it is mostly about these characters.
Which is interesting, because it betrays a little bit of Druckmann's like beliefs about why he thinks people are violent.
So it's very realistic for sure.
Yeah, in like a way that feels weird and shitty sometimes. Like, and this game is obviously very bleak, don't get me wrong, but like, it's philosophically bleak as well. I mean, that's kind of why I didn't hate the ending, because I was like, finally, like, something not awful happened for a second in this world. Because this is just like a painful fucking story to go through.
That is very true. It's not a pleasant experience.
No. I mean, I didn't mind Abby's stuff. It's kind of a bit more upbeat.
Yeah, it's made to be that way, and I kind of take issue with some elements of that, if I'm being honest, but we'll get there.
Sure.
Yeah. So then we get day 3, where Ellie heads to the aquarium in search of Abby, and boy, she confronts Owen and Owen's girlfriend Mel, and in the ensuing struggle, Ellie kills Mel and Owen, and then we find out that Mel is pregnant. But don't worry, guys. It was in self-defense, so it's fine.
She also kills the poor doggy.
Alice, yeah.
Alice,
Yeah, honestly, this scene was where I did think, okay, no, I think the narrative is just kind of using pregnancy as a cheap way to make women matter more.
Yeah.
I sort of understand that realization, would like suck, but at the same time, it is just this literal moment of Ellie being like, oh, right, well, I murdered these 2 people. Oh, no, one of them was pregnant. Now I'm super upset and having a panic attack. And like, I don't think that that's necessarily an invalid response on her part. Like, that this is the kind of thing that, taken just entirely on its own, is not illegitimate, I would say, but it did just kind of feel like the story was using pregnancy as a way to make it worse when women die. And
Yeah. Right. And then the dogs are used to make it worse when guys die, and it's like, what is this world?
Yeah.
Like, what is happening?
I mean, in all fairness, that is not a standard that the dog thing is not a standard that the game set up. There's literally a website called doesthedogdie.com just to tell people if dogs die in movies and games where
oh my god, that's amazing.
Because that is established as a thing that we respond more viscerally emotionally to, especially in a story that is about, murdering dudes. Like, I would say that using dogs to sort of get a one-up on the lives of people isn't necessarily, it's something the game uses, but I don't think it's the game's fault. If I'm being
Absolutely
honest.
not. It's just been in culture forever. Yeah.
True.
Dogs dying is fucking sad.
Right.
You heard it here first.
Yeah. Old Yeller moment.
I'm more of a cat person, but they never do that with
Thank
cats.
God.
So,
Yeah, thank God. That would be awful. I think the alternative here is you have Abby kill like a kid, but that would make her totally irredeemable. So they can't do that. It has to be a pregnant woman.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
because they're
the
trying to
thing.
be like, look at how depraved she is now. But it's still self-defense. So I'm like, which one is it? Like, is she depraved or was this a fucking accident? Like, it's so mismatched from the previous day where you're like, wow, like she really like, she's gone off the deep end. And then she seems to realize she's doing it, reels herself back in. And then this one's like an oopsie doodle. I killed Nell, now I have to kill Owen and the dog. Like, it has this tone of like, well, in for a penny, in for a pound, but not in a convincing way where I buy that Ellie's like it's tonally weird. Like, I like the scene, but it's just an odd sequencing of that escalation.
I mean, to be clear, it was the dog and then the two of them. The dog attacked her when she came in. It was, and then she came across Mel and what's his name, and then that happened.
Yeah.
But
yeah, and I was gonna say, like, I didn't hate the scene, but I will say that it sort of felt like Ellie sort of realizing, like, oh my God, what am I doing? But then that really doesn't mean anything because she still wants to kill Abby. Like, she's still super violent. It's just that she saw a pregnant woman, like that she killed a pregnant woman. Like,
yeah.
So
I would I definitely still take issue with the pregnancy thing, but I would say that it made enough sense to me on some level, if only because one thing that we've sort of skipped over at this point is that when she's going to the aquarium at first, she's with Jesse and they're trying to find
Tommy. Yeah.
Because the idea here is that Dina is in pretty bad shape. Continuing with what Ellie's doing right now is very, very possible, like, could get her killed. And so they're going to try and find Tommy and get out of here. And we have this moment where, where basically Ellie sees the aquarium and Jesse's like, no, we're here for Tommy. What are you doing? And she basically chooses her revenge quest over Dina's safety,
right?
And all like
that's the tacit implication.
There's this growing, which is one thing that I do actually think works really well in terms of the Dina's pregnancy plot point, is that we have this now, this promise of potentially a family, as well as the stakes raising in terms of, like, Ellie's going to need to choose between the safety of the woman she loves and their potential happy future together, or this anger and grief that she's holding on to, and she consistently is making the wrong choice here.
Yeah.
And so I think that having that moment where, even if it was in self-defense, where this obsession and all these wrong choices that she's making has now led to the unnecessary deaths of these two people, one of which was pregnant, again, for, including all of the issues with that. It's I feel like it worked, if only because it is sort of the climax of the game building up to this moment where Ellie's quest is going to take her too far.
Yeah, I would have liked it to not be self-defense, like commit to it and like just go the full nine yards and be like, yeah, she's truly fucked now. Like, I
can agree with that. Yes.
Yeah, for sure.
It felt like a safe bet because they knew that you were going to play as her again later. So they were like, we just don't want you to completely hate her guts.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
So we also then get a flashback here that reveals years earlier, Ellie traveled to the Firefly Hospital in Salt Lake City and learn the truth about what happened in the first game. She's devastated by this and consequently cuts ties with Joel. It's an interesting place for this flashback. I think, how do you guys feel about, and we'll talk about it when we get to the ending, but how do you feel about this idea that Ellie knew what happened in the first game, but it kind of resolved, her and Joel kind of made good before he died, before the dance, or after the dance rather. But how do you feel about like that flashback and sort of her learning what happened?
I think the flashback itself was effective, and honestly, that's how I expected she would react anyway. there's a tragic element of it that we could go into about her like essentially seeing the only value in her life being her death for that purpose. But like the point is that
she's crazy insecure. Like the whole time with Dina, she's like, "There's no way that this cute chick would like me ever." Like Ellie's like so insecure, like deeply so.
Yeah, well, that's the thing is I think that one of the defining elements of her character is that she thinks that the only good she could have done for the world was to die back then, and she didn't. Right. So, like, of course, yeah, she wouldn't see herself as much. I imagine that would tank one's self-esteem pretty bad.
I didn't save the world. It's a big bummer. Yeah. It's gonna make you're gonna be having a lot of 2-minute noodles and spending a lot of mornings in bed with that one for a while.
Yeah. But yeah, even without that element to it, like, I think it makes a lot of sense that she would be very angry at Joel for that, because she had that, that was just kind of her mission, and he took it from her without asking. In all fairness, again, the Fireflies were going to fulfill it at the cost of her life without asking. I think it's a complicated situation, but I can absolutely understand her anger at him. And I think that the scene sort of showing that happen was, I mean, like you've said, the acting and everything is fantastic. So
it's just phenomenal.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think also with the scene, it's kind of one of those moments where you're like, you just know it's going to come up at some point in this game, like where they're going to talk about it and he's going to tell her, yeah, this is what went down. And so in that way, it just seeing it felt somewhat cathartic, even though it was, just awful to see her reaction. And yeah, I thought it was a really, really well done scene. And I think it easily could have been a bad scene as well. And it wasn't. And they did a really good job with it.
Yeah, surprisingly restrained as well, which I was impressed by.
Yeah.
Like it was very, very restrained. Yeah, this is the downbeat in the middle of our story. So Ellie, reflecting on this, realizes that her quest for revenge is only creating more pain. And so she decides to head back to the theater and gather her friends to head home. As they plan to leave, Ellie's group is ambushed by Abby. And Abby immediately kills Jesse, like without blinking, and then holds Tommy hostage. And here we cut to 3 days earlier, which we'll talk about in a second because it is time for an ad break. But as far as endings go, so coming back to the theater, this surprised the shit out of me when when Abby busts in. I was not expecting that.
Shit. Jesse, stand up. Hands in the air. I shoot this one too.
Don't you do it, Ellie. Get out of here.
Stand up now.
Don't you fucking dare.
Shut the fuck up. Fuck. All right. Stop. Stop. Toss your weapon. Toss your weapon! Fuck.
No.
I know why you killed Joel. He did what he did to save me. There is no cure because of me. I am the one that you want. Just let him go. You killed my friends. We let you both live. And you wasted it.
I don't know what I thought was going to happen next. I was like, cool, I'm ready for this game to end. I'm good. And it was like, nah, here's a whole new scene. And then they were like, here's a half of another game you didn't want.
Right.
I'm like, okay. Is that how you guys felt about it, or is that just me?
Not the don't want part, honestly. Like, I did feel like the game was very long, and there was a part of me that was like, is this going to be short? Because I feel like it is going on a while. But I definitely did want to see her side of it, and I got the impression that's what the game was trying to do. So I didn't feel like it was necessarily like I didn't want it, even if the game was a little, running a little long. But it was very shocking and surprising. The whole immediately just single shot to the head at coming out of the door, dead thing,
dude,
gut punch for sure.
Yeah,
that Chad got killed bad.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I think that it did its job well in terms of basically having okay, suddenly things are going bad and you have a new reason to hate her. Now play her for a bit.
Right.
Yeah. Now play her for 3 days.
Yeah.
Well,
very working for what the game is trying to do there for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I was gonna say it's funny because when I was playing, it wasn't that I wasn't enjoying the game, but I just did feel tired, and I was like, "Oh, we're finally gonna confront Abby! Like, here we go, let's do this." And then when it cut, and it took a long time to load, I'm sitting there at this black screen, going, "All right, what's happening? Like, let's get into this fight." And then when it said day 1, Seattle, I'm like, and it showed Abby, I'm like, my first reaction was like, "You've got to be kidding me." No, I don't want to. Like
that was my brain. I did this. I was like, not because I didn't want more game, but I was just like, man, that was so harrowing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
About it. It's a game that's very just emotionally exhausting. So
Yeah.
I guess I do understand what you're talking about in terms of not wanting more in that sense. I did think that it's not that I thought the game had overstayed its welcome at that point necessarily, but I do understand being like, just let me rest for a moment, please.
Right. Well,
No, you're right though. You're exactly right, because it's not that it hasn't overstayed its welcome yet, but it's that you're like, just give me a fucking minute.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And
Just give me a second.
If I'm being honest, I feel like that can work toward what it's doing, because to basically just exhaust you with all of this awfulness and then tell you to empathize is, I think, something that speaks very well to what it's trying to do. Whether or not it works, I think definitely is probably one of those things that varies from person to person, and how exhausted you are, and for that matter, how much you're willing to consider that you should empathize with Abby, which apparently a lot of people on the internet are not even willing to consider that idea.
Whoa, well, hang on. She killed my video game dad.
Yeah,
So
my own video
can't
about
relate to her.
a while ago, and a lot of the comments were basically just about that. So
Really?
Yeah. I got some emails from the last episode.
Did you?
They were like, wow, I'm excited to see you talk about to shill out the SJW agenda for bloody Neil Druckmann in the bloody second game, mate. I'm like, okay.
I mean, as
Sure.
soon as anyone says SJW anything, you can just ignore everything they say. But
Pretty much.
It also like Warrior's quite a cool title. Like, I think it really makes me feel tough. And you know what I mean? I'm like I am a warrior. You're right.
Yeah,
it's not my favorite
SJW.
D&D class, but it's up there. You know,
Right.
it's good.
Yeah. It's no rogue, but I enjoy it.
Yeah.
Oh, that kind of just makes me want to play as an SJW in D&D. There we go.
Ooh,
Yeah.
that's a new class. They're putting that into D&D 6, 6th edition.
Let's rock it.
There's also it's SJW being the snowflake, and then also a cuck. Those are like the three. A simp as well. There's like the 4 key classes.
Okay, so a D&D campaign about like what a justice-focused paladin who is just really simping after this person who's having sex with someone else. Is that what we're?
That's what I'm thinking. Yeah. And I'm just like, that's the next evolution of storytelling, baby. And if you can't handle that, and you think it's pushing an agenda, you can fuck off.
Right.
We do have to take a quick ad break, and we will all go rewater and come back. But stick around after this break for the second half of the game, and we'll get to talking about the ending and all of the really interesting bits and bobs that go with it. So we'll see you guys right after these various products and possibly something else. Who knows what's being advertised? Enjoy. Hey guys, this episode is brought to you by the Maynard Trigg series. MaynardTrigg.com is where you'll find them. They are my brand new low sci-fi, low fantasy, coming of age novel series. The first one is out right now, plus a free short story, and the second book will be dropping really, really soon. Go check it out. I think you'll really enjoy it. MaynardTrigg.com. Okay, and we're back from our ad break. I went to get water, which apparently is an unpopular opinion.
It's not unpopular. I'm just happy on account of Election Day, so I got a beer.
Nice.
Good for you,
I'm very
buddy.
jealous. It's 10 in the morning, so that seemed irresponsible on my end. I will be having one later, though. Minor hangover update. Talking for 2 hours has not made it better. I'll say. Now, before we get into the second half, I want to read you a quote from the Jason Schreiber article on Neil Druckmann. It is one of the most fascinating articles I've ever read in my entire life. Jason Schreiber basically followed Druckmann around for 2 years and wrote this fantastic piece. I implore you to read it after this. But I just want to give you an idea of the type of person Druckmann is. And this in some ways will be like calling myself out, because this is probably people describe me in similar ways. It's not necessarily a good thing, but this is from the article. Quote, Throughout my time with Neil Druckmann, I discover that he is sort of unknowable without significant time investment. He lets little out there without some coaxing. He's not bothered by occasional lulls of silence and isn't, at least outwardly, fazed by the pressures on his shoulders. End quote. Druckmann is this like really internal dude. From all accounts, he's quite terse. He doesn't really talk that much unless he needs to. He has a lot in common with Ellie in that sense, which is interesting given the sections we're about to talk about. So basically, the game hard cuts, we were talking about it before the break, but the game hard cuts to the first day of Seattle of Abby. Abby is fucking shredded, and I love it. I'm like, give me more buff chicks in games, thank you.
It's not realistic, though. She wouldn't be realistic.
Can't exercise. Also, it's kind of fucked up that she spent the last like 10 years or however long it is just getting shredded so she can do revenge. That's kind of fucked. A little bit. But we cut to Abby, and we're actually going to swap to be playing her perspective. Now, Abby learns that her ex-boyfriend Owen has gone missing while investigating the Seraphites. We also meet a very... Okay, we're going to have to talk about like ethnicity now. We meet the most Mexican dude to ever Mexican dudes. He's this Hispanic guy who like has had all the sex with the ladies, and he's got the fun accent, and he's like all around the chill fun guy. Manny's just like the best, man. But he's also the most. Now, he has like the typical accent that you would expect, very, very Hispanic accent. Sometimes we'll switch to speaking Spanish instead of English. But they kind of get a few things wrong, and there was a really good discussion about this on the Waypoint Radio Last of Us Part 2 spoiler cast, where Cardo, who is Hispanic himself, and his first language, I think, is Spanish. He talks a little bit about the fact that like the game does this thing that's weird and kind of wrong, where Manny, when he is speaking in English, when he swaps to using various phrases in Spanish, he's not doing what you do when you're not a native speaker. Because what you do when you're not a native speaker is usually you use your original language when there isn't like a comparable word you can think of. So to be like, you know, in the same way that like there may not be a word in French for like a Big Mac or something, right? Like just as like an example. So you would drop back to the original language when you're talking in French. You'd be like, blah, 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 you know, je voudrais un Big Mac. You say that word in the language that it's accessible in. Manny just like drops in random fucking like bits of Spanish for no reason. And it's like, it's them trying to be like, look at us, look at him, look at, do you get it? He's the most. And I'm like, yeah, I get it. And like, I've met people like that and he seems nice, but it's just, I have a question off the back of that. Where did his accent come from in this world?
Because I mean, they're not that many generations into the pandemic, right? Like, right? Yeah, didn't we meet his like grandpa or something? Like theoretically, he still would have been raised by people who had the accents that they did.
Let's see if I can find out how many years into the apocalypse it is.
And while you do that, hang on one second.
Because I mean, Ellie was born like at the at the beginning of it, right, or a little before.
Yeah, well, she would. Yeah, hang on. Because she was raised after the end of the world.
Right. I forgot if she was born.
Last of Us Part 2 is set 5 years after the original Last of Us. Wow, it's only 5 years? Jesus. Okay. Mm-hmm. But how many years after the apocalypse is The Last of Us? Hang on. We could do some maths.
I want to say somewhere between 10 or 20. I forget exactly.
Yeah.
Actually, yeah, I think it's 12 I think it's 20. Right?
20 years later. Yeah. So that means this story takes place 25 years after the end of the world.
Right.
Now that's...
Which I'm guessing Danielle is around as old as Annie is.
Right.
Cat. Good cat.
Yeah. She just needed to come in and she was going to mess up the recording. She was scratching at the door.
My point is, like, it's just odd to... Everyone else, like, everyone we meet in Jackson, for instance, is, like, very middle Americanized. Like, they just kind of have fallen into being a frontier town, like, turn-of-the-century frontier town. But for some reason, like, this one guy is the only person in this world who has strong ethnicity. Just a weird choice. I don't feel strongly about it. It's just, it stood out to me.
Guess
and
that's fair.
that it stood out is like not a great, like must mean the execution wasn't where they wanted it to be.
Well, also he's
So-
a Neil Druckmann stand-in. At least everybody's been claiming.
Yeah,
He's-
there was some weird claims off the back of the game
Yeah.
that, yeah.
I don't know
I-
what. Yeah, I don't know how I feel about that. Like, it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. But I just
Also,
thought
like,
yeah.
Druckmann isn't Hispanic. I don't. It's just weird.
Right, that's-
like,
yeah.
I'm like,
Yeah,
dude's
that's
Middle
right.
Eastern.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I guess I'm not sure. I haven't heard those, like, that idea that he's a Druckmann stand-in, but just off the top of my head, I have no idea how that is a thing. Honestly,
It's
thinking about
not.
the character.
Yeah.
Like-
Everything I've read about Druckmann and every interview I've listened to with him, like, he's absolutely nothing like that character.
that's what I
That's
mean.
not-
Yeah.
Stand-ins, like, that's not, you know, when someone like inserts themselves into the work, it's usually like in a way to like give wisdom or something, not to make some jokes about how much you get laid and then get shot in the
Right.
head. Like,
Right.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
weird, huh?
I
Yeah.
don't-
It's just
yeah.
odd.
It's
Yeah.
funny that you haven't heard that because I heard that from so many people. I'm like, I mean, I guess like maybe look wise, but otherwise, no. I don't know.
Yeah. Now remind me, because I haven't detailed it too much in my notes. This is where we get the big tour of the WLF camp, right? Like you walk through
Yeah.
all the different areas, and it's very clearly supposed to be an occupying force. So this is very heavily modeled after like Americans in the Middle East, right? These people like check out weapons, they check out vehicles, everything is logged. They live in this like huge compound that's separated from the quote unquote like real world around them. We also meet Isaac, who is the militant leader that firmly believes there's no compromise with the Seraphites. Which I'm like, is he supposed to be a Bush analog? I don't know. But so we get this really interesting look at this society that is very militant. Like this is sort of completely different to Jackson. There's no honky tonk bar where you can get a steak sandwich from the guy who called you a slur. Like it's very much like you will get, I would imagine in this world, like you don't get meals, you get rations. Like when you live here, it's got that kind of vibe to it. What did you guys think of the space and the way that it felt like as you were kind of going through it?
well, just I get all the like militaristic structure stuff is definitely there for sure, but I have to admit I didn't get the opposing force vibe. Not the like
occupying. Yeah.
occupying force vibe. I sort of read it as a society that has managed to do pretty well in like providing for the people who were inside it, but who have done so through a, you know, very, very, very structured. Like we didn't see much about like the actual like politics or inner workings of it or whatever, but it is definitely very militarist, structured, gives potentially kind of fashy vibes, just, you know, based on how much
Smidge.
it. But yeah, but then again, like we're in a situation where, you know, it's not just like outside separating itself from other cultures. It's separating itself from the
fucking
you know,
zombies.
that are, yeah. So like, there's a degree to which that can come off as more reasonable in this situation than necessarily immediately reading as a fascist analog. But I didn't think it was a particularly like oppressive environment personally.
I didn't get that impression either. The fashy thing is interesting because this is like a thing that a lot of zombie stuff thinks about. I mean, particularly the Walking Dead comics dwell on this deeply, and the TV shows try to, which is that like
Maybe it doesn't do anything successful.
yeah, it's season 4 is quite good. Anyway,
3 was when I rage quit. Honestly,
I've
early.
watched it.
Huh?
I've watched it all because I'm working on this huge article about it. I've literally watched every episode of that show.
Oh yeah, I watched season 1 and then I read the comics up to a certain point and then tried to get back into the show and just hated it so much after reading it.
Can I just say
It's
that I
rough,
don't
man.
ever want to touch The Walking Dead except the game because I just don't care. Like I'll play
game.
the game, don't care about any, and maybe the comics because I've heard they're good. Nothing. I don't want to watch that show at all.
That's fine.
You don't. We're not going to force you.
No. I mean, I'm just saying. Like, I feel
Danielle's
good
drawing
about
a line
that.
in the sand, people.
Look, I've also never been to Taco Bell in my life, and I'm never going. So
Okay, now that I get you.
Yeah. What? Why not?
Look, that's a whole can of worms, but I'm just making a comparison. We can talk about it off podcast.
Okay. The other thing, so like the thing that show is intensely interested in the comics too is like, to what extent Rick becoming this fearless leader and with these fashy tendencies is necessary for survival, and to what extent that it's okay to let that go when you are safe. And this is a situation where the guy in charge, despite the fact that they are theoretically safe because they're at constant war with these Seraphites, this is just Israel and Palestine, by the way, because they're at constant war with these Seraphites, he needs to get ever more fashy because he's like, well, we have to wipe them out. Like, we have to, we don't have a choice. It's like, nah, you have like so many options. You just think that's your only choice. So I just think like the politics of that is interesting. Knowing what I know about Druckmann, like this conflict is literally 1-to-1 with Israel and Palestine. There's even a fucking like there's a neutral zone and a wall. Like, it's very on the nose, this stuff. But so we've got Abby heading out in search of Owen, and she's actually captured by the Seraphites, or the Scars, I think is the colloquial name that the WLF have for them. And she's rescued by hunters Yara and Lev.
Demons are coming. Cut her down. She's one of them. Lev.
Yara's pretty fucked up, and Abby helps the two of them to safety that night. What did you guys think of the introduction of these two darling children?
It was rough watching poor Yara. That was honestly, for me personally, one of the harder scenes to watch. I look away a lot of times when it comes to the violence, but I looked away. I was like, please don't show me that. Like, that is just awful. Like, her poor arm. Oh my God. But yeah, at first I wasn't sure what to make of them. And I was surprised that the story ended up going in the direction that it did, because I just thought they were one-off characters. I didn't think we'd ever see them again, to be honest.
At this point, did you think that playing as Abby was going to be a really short, like, had you worked out or had it settled in that this was like a whole fucking other game, or were you guys still in the headspace I was, where I was like, I'll be playing as Abby for like 30 minutes and then I'll be back.
I think this is probably around the time that I started realizing, oh no, that this is like thing. This is the second half.
Mm-hmm.
At first I was like, oh, they're going to fill me in, and more than that.
No.
Right.
Also, like, how crazy is Abby's like core strength, man, when she's being hung and she's just like strangles a dude with her legs and shit and like gets us. I'm like, this chick is like crazy buff. Yeah. Like, she could crush my head with like one of her biceps.
But yeah, no, I definitely liked the introduction. It was very intense and dark. Gave us a good, because like we hadn't, I don't know, if as far as I remember at least, we hadn't come across the Seraphites in any way really, except for either killing them or hearing about how fanatical and violent they are.
Yeah.
And this definitely was still lending itself to that fanatical, violent interpretation, but it was the first time we really saw sort of the religious element of it, like that sort of very distilled down idea of like punishment for wrongdoing and stuff as it sort of relates to their cult. And aside from that, I just really like Lev and Yara, like off the bat. And I think that the whole sequence where, they consciously make the decision, like, that is WLF, her people have been killing us or whatever, but she saved us, I'm going to save her. And then that bit soon afterwards, as they're all running away, when you as Abby are defending yourself in this small, cramped space from all of these fungus zombies or whatever. And you have to get the two of them out to try and, get them around to another door that'll let you out. And there's a while where you think that they've abandoned you.
They've just gone. Yeah.
I really, really liked that, actually. It
works
made me
so well.
Really,
yeah.
So I just think, I think the introduction of the characters was quite good, personally.
That whole sequence is so well put. That when you get down from the rope and you've got the hammer and the zombies are just like running at you out of the darkness, so good. Like that whole sequence. Yeah. I was shitting myself the whole time.
Oh,
I was like, "Holy fuck, what's gonna happen next?"
And that is, for what it's worth, like my favorite. It's always, I guess this is just a general thing, that zombies are always better used as ways to heighten other tension as opposed to a threat in and of themselves. But like this kind of thing, I love when it's not just like, oh, we gotta get through the zombies, but like you're waiting on other like the significance of that scene has nothing to do with the fact that there are zombies trying to eat you, and everything to do with whether these two characters will come back for you.
Right. And
that's good. I appreciate how far games have come from, it's a zombie game because you can kill zombies without guilt.
Yeah, we've moved on from that a bit. Now it's like the zombies are both a setting and a plot device. Like
you can kill them without guilt, but not the other people.
Right.
Make you feel that stuff.
I just have to note as well, like this section, like when you're waiting for them, like to possibly come back or not, it was so dark and I could hear them saying, "Abby, over here," and I'm just running around in circles. I couldn't see them. I
had to area. So like, I was in a similar situation where I wasn't right there where they were because like I had to go elsewhere. It's a very small, cramped area, and there's just like it was very scary and good.
Yes.
It's very well put together scene. I think the only thing in the game that scared me more is the first time as Ellie. It's like one of the only times you as Ellie encounter the scars, which is where you're in the forest.
Yes.
It's a pretty similar location actually to the scene we're talking about. And the arrow like comes flying out of the darkness, and I fucking lost. I was like, "What the fuck?" And then and you just hear this whistling from like different areas.
Yeah.
And like as the combat goes on, I start to work out like, oh, that's the whistle for like they found me. They're like, this is the like we found a whistle. And every time I heard that one, I absolutely shit myself.
I remember it too. That's the first time you come across human enemies who are capable of moving quietly enough that you can't like sense them.
Yeah.
Like that, I remember just like being already in this tense situation and then just like watching this person move and then they disappeared. And I'm like, shit.
And the fact that you don't know where they are half the time and you just hear this like them whistling to each other. And when they do that one where it's like, "We found you." So a lot of the time, like I couldn't see them. I'm like, I don't know where they're, how do they know where I am? And then they like run out behind you.
Right.
Or they shoot an arrow from behind you. Like it's just a really cool, like really, really cool setting, that forest.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so then you manage to escape with Lev and Yara, and Abby helps them to safety where they stay somewhere for the night. She then goes and catches up with Owen in like the coolest like kids' treehouse I've ever seen in my entire life in the aquarium. Everybody in this world gets to have like the dopest hangouts. Like he's got like fairy lights and shit. He's like playing Nerf with like a bow and arrow. Like this dude's Owen has some like periodically some like major fuckboy vibes, and this was one of those moments where I was like, man, it's a real chat over here.
He's got his man cave.
He's got his man cave. Yeah,
literally.
I was expecting them to I was impressed they had the restraint not to be like, and here is his PlayStation and TV.
Oh god.
We did get to see a PS Vita, but not in that context.
Right. Yeah, that's right. I forgot about that. Yeah.
Because the brand is strong in the apocalypse.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
Sure that there's only one, like Ellie killed the last PlayStation fan. Like that's
damn, bro. No, that was Druckmann that did it when he killed Joel. So she catches up with Owen. Owen's being fucking weird, man. He's like, it's this weird flirty, it's a really weird interaction they have. And he explains that he's kind of disillusioned with the whole war plan. He wants to go to Santa Barbara, where the Fireflies might be regrouping. That's sort of his plan. He's going to take a boat and do that. He's not going to fight in this invasion of the Seraphite Island. He's out, man. He's a revolutionary baby. So now, correct me if I'm wrong. Is that where they get their fuck on, or is that the following night?
That's later, yeah. Sorry,
Is
am I
it?
wrong? I'm pretty sure that's later.
Wait, I can't remember now. Actually,
I remember this as the scene where we establish their existing sexual tension, and then, it's later that it actually turns out.
Are we
I think
talking
it's
about the flashback scene with the when you're shooting at the targets? Like, what scene are we
No.
talking about?
we're talking about.
Yeah, I know the flashback happens before you see how it currently is.
Yeah, we're talking about the scene where Abby actually goes to Owen and in the aquarium.
like in the present day.
In the present
but I'm
day.
pretty sure that the sex doesn't happen until the next time they see each other there. I guess I'm not 100.
I'm pretty sure it must be that night, because the next morning she goes to Lev and Yara and doesn't tell him where she's going.
Yeah, that it could. Well, yeah, I guess
No, that is actually, yeah. So they do, because that's when she has that dream, and then she goes back for them.
That's what it is. Yeah, and it's the dream, which is fucking weird. This whole it's a weird sequence.
I remember this. Okay, yeah.
Sorry, I don't actually remember a dream. What's the dream?
It's the one where she's going through the hospital, and then
Oh, right. Okay,
Yeah.
Because they repeat a few times, and yeah, okay.
yeah.
How did you guys feel about this very tasteful video game sex scene?
There is a part of there. I feel like honestly, and this might be kind of immature, but my biggest reaction was I love that, considering how many like stupid, gross dude bros are upset that Abby isn't conventionally attractive enough for them, that when there's a scene with sex and nudity, it's her and not Ellie. I'm sure that they're very upset about that. Take some Schadenfreude in that, but
Absolutely.
that's a very immature response to it. I know, but
They fucking go at it. Like this is not a healthy situation for anyone.
Oh,
like there's a lot of fucking anger here. That is not good.
I will say I was surprised that they had it in here, but not like in general. Like I don't really care. I don't mind sex scenes, like, because I think they can serve a purpose. And I thought I was like, oh, they're going there. Okay, that's fine.
That's the thing. If this was in an R-rated movie, I wouldn't even that happened. That's normal.
Right, yeah.
I think the reason it really stands out at all is because this is a video game, and usually sex doesn't happen in a video game unless it's, there to be like sexy and
True.
and even
Well,
then,
it's interesting that Abby is the only one that's allowed to be properly sexualized. Obviously, we get Dina and Ellie have their off-screen sex scene in the weird dungeon.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that it's Abby that is the one who is allowed to be sexualized on screen. And I think that's like probably a pretty healthy way that they've approached this, where it's like, yeah, she's the hot ass. She's like in complete control of her destiny. Like this isn't. There's nothing about it that even rings of being exploitative or like.
Yeah,
like
I think that they went into it knowing that it could be kind of gross to be like, hey guys, look at our lesbian representation. Now we're gonna show them fucking like that.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that they went into it knowing that was not going to be a very acceptable approach to Ellie and Dina's relationship. So yeah.
Well, especially with how heteronormative the queerness is in this story, where it's like, Ellie is like the deadbeat dad, Dina's like the caring mom. Like the gender roles in this story are very heteronormative, despite there being queer characters. So I think they would have sensed like that. Yeah, putting in a sex scene with Ellie and Dina, like it probably weirdly would have felt like a bridge too far in the context of the game, and yet this straight sex scene seems fine, which probably speaks more to like the cultural issues that we have as a society when it comes to sex scenes and queerness and expression of queerness in stories, rather than like anything this game in particular is doing. Like I think it's maybe like a larger discussion that I'm sure other people are far more equipped to handle.
It's a very complicated discussion because I think that, and we can talk about how well or badly like they approach their various queer representation in this game, but there's a lot of they try. You can absolutely tell that they are trying to make sure that they are doing this right, and I think that that's definitely a part of it. And it's very complicated in general to talk about that sort of thing in comparison to like how it is versus how it should be versus how it is in the context of the society we're in, etc. And it's a whole thing, and
it's difficult.
And I don't feel comfortable giving any actual types of answers on that on account of me not being, but
Yes. Also, the game is obviously like propaganda. We all know that, right? It's selling. Right. It's trying to convert everyone into SJWs. So
you're gonna become gay after playing this game. I don't know if you know that. Like,
damn, bro.
Yeah.
That's crazy. Am I also gonna be able to play guitar or?
Yes.
And become a murderer.
Yes, that too.
Well, to be fair, you don't already know that I'm not. So.
Oh, true.
Yeah. Now, our two characters get their fuck on, and then the next morning, Abby heads back, planning to help Yara and Lev. She has this dream where, it's the hospital, and they're there, and she sort of has like a come to Jesus moment, which is like, man, maybe killing is bad. Maybe I should go save these kids. It's a very like non-complicated moral dilemma for her. So talking to Lev, the younger of the two, Abby realizes that they'll need to go to the WLF hospital to get some medication for Yara. And we get like a really fucking cool sequence here with the sky bridges.
It's the worst. I hate it. I got such bad vertigo on that. I hated it so much.
That is interesting.
I have a fear of heights, and they did a good job selling what it feels like to be up very high, like it just visually with the controls and with everything. And it was bad.
Also, if you look down as Abby at any point when you're at like a high area, the camera kind of like does this weird zoom shift thing, which feels like vertigo, and it made me physically feel ill. That's how good that is. Like. Yeah, I was like so tense that whole bridge, but it's so cool, and I love that they're crossing this bridge, and like Abby is having this moment of like pure panic, and Lev goes, "So what's the deal with you and Owen?"
Yeah, she's like, "Really, Lev? Now?
She's like, "Fucking now!" It's so good. It's such a good moment.
Honestly, this is one of my favorite things about video. Like, this is a very simple example, obviously, but like this game. I don't care if you're afraid of heights or not. This game sells you on what it's like to be. And I love the games can do that. I love when they're just, when a game has enough polish and attention to detail to just really use as many tools as possible in their disposal to sell an experience like that. I love it. It's really good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it's good.
They just kept going up and up, again, dude.
It's so. Yeah, you keep being like, okay, cool, like we're gonna get to the there's more.
Yep.
Oh, we're at the top, no, still going, and you're like, Jesus Christ.
Like the game itself, really.
True.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, it's
exactly.
Metaphor.
I did fuck up though when I was playing this the first time. I was playing it at like maybe like midnight or something like that. And I was like a little bit too high. And it just was so upsetting.
Oh no.
The vertigo, I was like, I can't do this. I need to revisit later. Like it was very the sensory input was very intense. I fucked up, guys.
Sensory overload on that one.
Yeah, exactly. So we head to the hospital to grab this medication for Yara. So then we get from like one of the coolest sequences in the game to like, in my opinion, one of the worst, which is this vertical climb down a zombie-infested building.
Yeah.
That is just like painstakingly slow in a way that for me, I didn't enjoy it. I don't know how you guys felt about this section.
Okay. I have to tell you both that speaking as someone who I don't like the horror movie genre strictly because I don't like being scared. Why am I playing this game? I don't know, but I don't like being scared. I don't like things jumping out at me. And this section in particular incorporated that thing where the zombies or infected were like caked into the wall.
Yep.
And I could not take it. Like it was partially slow because I was moving slow because I'm trying to find them, and when I did find them, I would quickly get my silencer on and shoot them so that I could move forward. It was just a nightmare for me.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, I think that this really all like the rest of this like from here on through the end of the hospital section is probably my least favorite part of the game. Not on a narrative element, but like I talked before about like, game structures and stuff and how much like do all of these things in hours of gameplay before you get to the next thing that actually matters happens. And obviously the hospital matter, but then there's another gameplay segment like after that I really feel was just kind of meandering and unnecessary. And we'll get to it in a bit, but like, yeah, I think that this was a whole lot that we'd already accomplished our Abby and Lev hanging out and getting to know each other part. And that we didn't necessarily need this big old zombie infested thing to just kind of lengthen the game before you get to the hospital and after.
Yeah.
So yeah, I agree.
Yeah, it just felt like I felt the length for the first time.
Yeah,
it was the only part of the game where I really struggled to come back to it and keep playing. I was like, like
I feel like it was done fairly well. But that also, I don't know. I feel like if this was a segment in an Evil Within sequel or something, I wouldn't have any complaints. But
yeah.
Evil Within, sorry, I haven't played those. I don't know if that, because I don't think they have zombies or whatever. I don't know. But point being, like,
they probably do.
I felt the tension. I felt the, like the verticality of it was sort of an interesting way to mix things up from what was going on before. It just, I felt like it was out of place. I didn't want to deal with it. Right?
Yeah, didn't want to deal with it.
Yeah. And that's not a good sign. Like, it's probably pretty impressive. This is one of the few parts of the game that has that feeling to it.
And this also, I should add, is when I was like, all right, so we are playing all 3 days, like fully. Like,
yeah,
I know
Yeah. When I picked up the flamethrower, I was like, God damn it, they're making me play this whole thing.
I think picking up the first, like, unique weapon you get as Abby, or no, it might even have just been when I was playing as Abby and realized that I was getting upgrade trees for, upgrading my character.
Like, God damn.
Yeah, okay. That's not a short-term thing you're doing there. Okay.
Right.
Yeah, it's such a choice.
I was lying to myself. I was like, oh, no, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. It's going to be quick. It's going to be like, just like day 1 will be really short. Day 2 will be really short. All right. Nope.
Day 3 is pretty short, so you got that at least.
True.
Now, the next thing that happens is they get the meds, and Abby heads back and successfully amputates Yara's arm, which is a very confronting scene.
What about the big monster dude?
Yeah, I was going to say, can we not? Well, actually, please skip over it, but we shouldn't.
Let's talk about it. Let's talk about the Resident Evil boss fight. Okay.
Well, here, I can take this bullet because here's the thing. That sequence is the king of what I was just talking about in terms of, like, if that was in a Resident Evil game, I would be 100% here for it. It was tense. It was scary. There was this moment where, like, I did turn the power on so doors would open, and then I go into a room and a door that was previously closed was open, and there was just, like, it was stuffed full of, like, fungal zombie shit in there, and with, like, a little hole that I could theoretically crawl through. It didn't let me, but, like, theoretically, and I was just like, nope. Like, it was good. It was scary. It was a very, and potentially interesting world building. Apparently Seattle, and this hospital in particular, was ground zero for the virus. So you're coming up against, like, some of the oldest in existence. And that is cool and interesting in a game that isn't this. None of The Last of Us is about that. I don't care where the first zombie came from in The Last of Us. If it was Resident Evil or something, yeah, I absolutely would. I don't know why it was in here, honestly. I think it's really out of place, and I just kind of hate that I had the Rat King for, like, hours.
Yeah.
It's like a dream from a different. It's like a segment from a different game snuck its way in here.
Yeah,
where they were like, oh yeah, this is the boss fight from a game that's exclusively about zombies.
Yeah,
well,
it's like, what? Yeah.
Here's the thing too. Like, in games, like this happens in the first Last of Us, where Joel and Ellie are on that elevator, and of course Joel's going to climb up to get out, and the elevator falls, and like, okay, that's a video game thing. Now you're gonna have to deal with that. And so, but every time it happens, I'm always like, but I don't want to deal with it. Like, I don't want to go in that dark, scary place. Please don't make me. And
it's sort of a nightmare, because this whole section is terrifying.
Well, can I just tell you too that like because it was so dark, I was constantly crouching and trying to listen around me, and I actually saw the outline of the Rat King behind the door, and you could like hear it kind of.
Oh, I did that. I forgot about that.
Yeah. And I was like, oh no, no, like, please.
Yeah. If their goal was to make this section scary, they fucking succeeded.
They did. Oh.
That, when you get into the basement of the hospital, and it's like, as you were saying, Sam, it's like the original like patient zero site. I was like, what the fuck is going to be down here? Like the setup is brilliant, and then it's just this like weird boss fight. It's weird, like it's weird and kind of.
It's
so
so
long. Yeah.
So long. I like it's too simple for being as long as it is. It essentially eventually just kind of comes down to run toward one end of it, shoot it as it comes at you, run to the other end of it, shoot it as it comes at you, and then a smaller thing breaks off and just annoys you some of the time. But like, it's not. If it was going to be that long, they should have given it multiple stages so that there, would be movement in the fight. Or better yet, don't make it that long. Or better yet, just don't do it, honestly.
You're like a new mechanic. Like, that's the weird thing, is like one of the coolest things that we were talking about before is like that first time you fight the Scars. It's like a whole new mechanic of them being able to hide. There's nothing new in this fight.
Right, yeah.
You just run away and then you shoot it. And you keep doing that until it's dead.
Fun fact, if you're replaying this section, apparently if you put the flame thing at it, it actually will take more damage from your bullets, so you can make it a little faster.
Okay, see, that's a cool idea.
Yeah.
I'll get that. But yeah, I don't know. It felt like, we all know that the best zombie stories are about the people, not the zombies, and that includes like the Last of Us and the Walking Dead game and stuff like that. And this game does that, except for right here.
Right.
Yeah.
It feels like the one moment where it abandoned that and became about the zombies, and I didn't need that, really.
Even though it was really interesting. Like, I'm annoyed at how interesting it was, but I just don't give a shit.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm like, this is fascinating, but it's got nothing to do with this game.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, now that you brought up Resident Evil, 100%, I could see that sequence being in the Resident Evil 2 remake or something, and it did perfectly, but
it was like the boss fight at the end of that game where I'm like, why is this here? So weird. But Abby does then, so after killing this fucking Rat King, she heads back and successfully amputates Yara's arm. The next morning, Lev... So basically, like, Lev runs away to go and convince his mother to leave the Seraphite cult. And this pretty much forces Yara and Abby to go after him. Now they find... so this is also the same day as the invasion of the Seraphite Island, which we know is like going to end poorly because old mate who's in charge, our slightly fashy leader, Isaac, he's like, this is the last charge. This, like, we're going to wipe them out for good. This will be the last fight we ever have with these bloody Scars. We're going to get it done. And he wants Abby at the front. He wants Abby to lead this charge. And now Abby, having now rejected the WLF, after 2 days with these kids, versus 10 years of her life, right? 2 days with these kids, 5 years of her life, rather. 2 days with these kids, and she says to Lev, no, you're my people. And it's so weird. Like, she doesn't know these, like... I get, like, narratively why it makes sense, but it just, like, it makes no fucking like, there's no logic behind it. It's like, yeah, I get that she has to be invested, but she's just met these people. Like, it's literally been 48 hours. And she's like, no, fuck the WLF. You're my people now. My role as the Joel is now coming to fruition. I'm going to be your dad. That's what's happening. And so I get it structurally, I get it thematically, but it just didn't sit right with me.
I think this is one of those moments where, for me at least, it may not make all that much logical sense, but it made enough emotional sense to me to work. Kind of like how at the end of Persona 4, like, obviously my character's going to go back home. Like, obviously, they have a whole life back there, but I don't know anything about it. I don't want to leave these people, Like, I understand that it doesn't necessarily make much sense in the context of the rest of Abby's life, but I also felt like it worked well enough for where I was at with the game and characters emotionally that I didn't take issue with it personally. But that's definitely a personal preference. I can see how that would bother others.
Yeah, it's one of the things the game gets criticized for a lot. It's like, why would Abby make such a radical change in such a short period of time? But you're right, it feels emotionally true, which is like the more important thing.
I was gonna say, like, I as well, like, I felt so, like, I really liked Abby's story. At this point, I was very much invested, and like, I like Abby a lot. I want to see where this is going. And when she said that, it resonated with me emotionally, like on the emotional level. I get what you're saying though about the logical thing, but definitely emotionally, I was like, I feel that.
I will say that your mileage obviously may vary on how well this worked because it did between us, but I feel like there is a degree to which they're setting this up to that point too, not just because she cares about these two people, but with Owen's whole like what they're doing is wrong, this doesn't work, and I'm not going to be part of it, and offering her a way out too. Like, she's not just screw this, I'm doing my own thing. She has an escape like, this is her saying, okay, yeah, this is not cool, I'm going against this, I'm going to do this instead. So and whether or not all of that works, I'm sure, obviously it comes down to like personal preference and how we're all experiencing this story. But I feel like it is worth noting at least that they did make some effort to set it up as a plausible action for her to take.
Yeah,
100%. And you can see the cogs turning with the Owen stuff as well, and like pushing us slowly in that direction. To be honest, like the thing that bothered me the most was like Owen as a dude. I'm like, he's not all that. Like, the likelihood of him like egging her on and convincing her to do this stuff, I'm like, there's nothing special about this guy. Like, it's like he's very normal, and only that is part of the reason why it didn't emotionally resonate as much as I thought it would. But we then go to the island on D-Day, so the invasion is happening around us. Now, Abby seems to know the plan a little bit. She seems to know the WLF plan a little bit, so she's able to work around them and not get in their way too much. But she her hand is forced, so she kills her first WLF soldiers, and it's like breaking the seal. She kills one, and then she's like, fuck it, and it's a murder spree across this goddamn island. And she is just these really cool, long, open stealth sections where you become like fucking Batman, where you just like stealthing around, making a plan, slipping in and slipping out and killing people. It's some really good gameplay. And really, really good location use as well, I think. And then we catch up with Lev. And Lev has, in this quite horrific scene, been forced to, in self-defense, has killed his mother. And this scene was just like really hard to be in. Just the strength of the acting and the way it's the writing, like how confronting it was to have Lev, this character who we've really grown to like, just at this like complete loss of what to do and like almost catatonic after this decision, and being forced to kill his own mother because she sort of preferred to, or didn't want to leave the cult. Really like fucking heavy stuff.
Didn't want to leave, but attacked Lev.
Right. Yeah. True.
Yeah. Which is a whole like the thing that hits me about this, and it occurs to me we haven't talked about the fact that Lev is trans yet, and that has come up at this point in the story, and we should do that. But in terms of this scene, the thing that strikes me about it is that I, as someone with a complicated and now rather adversarial past with evangelical Christianity, in or hopefully soon after the Trump era, have a if I could, like, Lev going here in the first place was extremely stupid and has some very bad consequences, as we'll see in a bit. But if I could risk a whole lot to bring like members of my own family back from the God prophesied about Trump because he's the whatever, like, Brink, I do it. Like, I relate a whole lot with Lev's just sort of attempt to say, like, look, I'm sorry, like, like, this is a problem, and I want you to come with me. I don't want to leave. I need to leave this, but I don't want to leave you. I need you to come with me. And then for that to go as wrong as it did, it hit me pretty hard, honestly. It's that whole scene and story for this character is a lot.
Yeah. It's very emotionally impactful. Yeah. I think too the setting of like this being during the invasion too creates this weird like interesting dichotomy where it's set against the backdrop of like this quote unquote like the beginning of the end of the war between these two competing factions, and it's also the end of Lev's family in some ways. And there's like a nice kind of parallelism that starts to things start to feel final in a way that's kind of scary and like confronting, I think. What did you think about it, Danielle, coming off I suppose coming off the back of the all the Owen stuff and the now that Ellie's like, pretty far in the rear view, and we're so invested in this. What was that like?
To be honest, like being like at this point very invested in Abby's side of the story and just caring about Lev very deeply. Just I really love, like he's probably my favorite character, honestly, in the game. And like when I saw this, I just thought like I was afraid to see what was going to be on the other side of that door when they walked in, and seeing their mother dead, I was like, oh my god, like just thinking about like a child being forced, like no matter what the situation, like to kill their parent, like it's just awful to think about. And like everything they've already been through as it is, it hit me hard, to be honest. And I think partially too what Sam was saying, even though I didn't consciously think about that when I was playing, but when you're putting it into words like that, it definitely resonates. But yeah, it was rough. That was a tough scene to get through. The whole sequence was, I mean, it was a good sequence, but that was hard. Yeah, and I think especially with how good the gameplay is leading up to that, I just found myself being really pulled in. Yeah. Like that was one of the sequences where I was like, it's midnight, I should go to bed because I have work in the morning. And I was like, nah, I'm going to keep going. And I wished I hadn't, because then that happened and I was like, Jesus, fuck, that was intense. Yeah. And so eventually Lev kind of, you get Lev moving and the trio flees as the WLF assault begins, and it's properly underway. Like they are firebombing. They are like, it's a crazy scene you could kind of find yourself heading into. And then we get this weird sort of, I don't know what to call it, but it's sort of a downbeat, but it's not, because it comes off the back of Lev's mom. We get Yara sacrificing herself to allow Abby and Lev to escape. And it's very much a like it plays in to every trope ever of like the hero's sacrifice. Like she may as well have jumped in front of a fucking bullet. For me, it played out as like kind of very cliche, but it still worked. But it's an interesting sequence too, because the visuals are so crazy cool with like this firebombing, and you're sort of working your way through this place that's falling apart. And then you just have this sudden act of violence where like Yara's just gone. How did that work for you guys?
Yeah, I'd say the game plays into the, suddenly someone's just gone thing quite a bit, actually. It did that for Jesse's death. It did that for Manny's death. It did that for, there's a lot of, which that's a very effective one for me. I don't know exactly what. One reason or another, I'm going to be a lot more affected by someone unexpectedly and suddenly just being dead than it's going to be for like a protracted gory sequence of them dying or whatever. Like that shocks me pretty bad. So that it works for me for sure. And I don't know. Yara is one of those where like I don't necessarily take issue with it as a story choice. I just don't like it because I'm sad about it.
Same. Yeah.
I'm not sure that anything would have been... I don't know that I would say that this doesn't add anything to the story necessarily, but I'm also not sure that there would have been anything lost by still having her around for the rest of it. But I really like her, and I'm sad that happened. And then just as another side note, I would say that the firebombing sequence and stuff is one of the few like exciting set piece segments that I think actually really works in this game. Like the car chase thing with Jesse felt out of place to me. It felt like it was an Uncharted. Like the game was like, oh, I feel bad for killing these people. Anyway, have some fun with shooting the guys in the truck. It's very exciting.
Right.
But like this felt properly desperate and messed up anyway. So I felt like it worked, and I thought that sequence was good without being thematically dissonant. So that's good.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah.
Interesting point. Yeah. It definitely. I hadn't thought about it before, but you're right. They would have lost nothing if she hadn't died, which is weird to think about.
Yeah.
Odd. We also get like this sequence plays out very quickly in the game space. Like you're kind of powering through this, trying to escape. But now we get our timelines starting to collide. So Abby heads back to the aquarium to find the bodies of Owen and Mel. And then also a map that Ellie has accidentally left behind that leads to the cinema.
Can I just interject there for a second? Mm-hmm. I kind of hate when stories do that, because when she left that map behind, I knew instantly. I'm like, all right, so that's how they're gonna find her, like, because she left the map behind. I hate when stories do that. It just, I understand why they did it, but it just feels lazy. And I mean, look. If they had gone through extra stuff to figure out where she was, that would have been like a whole big chunk of game. Clearly we didn't need that, but I hated that. I was like, oh, all right, well, we know what's going to happen now.
It's just like it's another contrivance. At this point, as I'm playing through the first time, I'm just like, this is exhausting.
Right.
Like just right cause and effect. Like it's not that hard. Everything has to be this like slight coincidence.
Yeah.
Danielle's being mobbed by the cat. all I can see on my other monitor is just the shape of the cat moving around.
I know.
There's all more reason to watch the video version.
Right.
The map thing, it's not great. But you need to get her there somehow.
Right.
I don't really understand why they couldn't have written around that, and like maybe Ellie refused to kill the dog, and then the dog was able to track her down. Like you have so many other options. Instead, we're just treated to this like weird, stilted, like, well, I got the map. I guess I'm gonna go find him. And we get the same scene, but played out from Abby's perspective, where she brains Jesse, and then shoots Tommy through the head, which is very intense.
You gonna kill me like a coward?
You fucking people. Jesse, stand up! Hands in the air, I shoot this one too.
Don't you do it, Ellie. Get out of here.
Stand up! Now!
Don't you fucking dare!
Shut the fuck up! All right, stop! Stop! Toss your weapon. Toss your weapon!
No.
I know why you killed Joel. He did what he did to save me. There is no cure because of me. I am the one that you want. Just let him go. You killed my friends. We let you both live. And you wasted it. Wait! Get off of her! Stop me! Come on.
Then we get a brawl that basically breaks out between Ellie, Dina, and Abby. How did you guys feel about this sequence?
Well, I didn't want to. At that point, I was like, I have to hurt Ellie. Like, I don't know, because I was sort of more on Abby's side at that point. If you had to like choose a side, and so I was like, okay, feel she's somewhat justified, but then like also no, please don't make me do this. I didn't love it, but I thought it was a good confrontation. I thought it got a lot more violent. Like, I didn't think Dina was alive. I didn't think Tommy was alive at the end. Like, I thought he had died as well, honestly.
I think that was intense for sure.
I guess so, yeah. And I also thought Dina, like, I was like, there's no way she could have survived that, but apparently she did. So
also, like, also the being hunted by Ellie was fucking terrifying.
yeah. Oh my god.
Like,
that's the thing is, I
scary.
think that I didn't enjoy this sequence, but frankly, I could say that for most of the game, if I'm being honest. Like, it was extremely stressful. I did not want to be taking either side on this, but I think that what makes it something that I would say is actually an excellent sequence is the fact that they kept you in Abby's perspective for this, that they didn't return you to the character that you, like, knew, and, you know, it turned Ellie into the antagonist, and frankly into quite a terrifying antagonist.
Yes.
And forced you to carry out even this, the most, like, personal and final and emotionally difficult confrontation, into this exercise in... I don't even know if I'd call this an exercise in empathy, because it's not... At this point, I don't know that it's necessarily saying, hey, you should be on Abby's side for this, so much as it's just emphasizing the fact that sides aren't really applicable in
it's
this
like,
case necessarily, that there's no good side or bad side, and it's just confusing and emotionally exhausting, and, you know, I think
like
that it worked well. Putting you in Abby's shoes was the best decision they could have made for it.
Yeah, and it's like that moment when you realize that, like, your parents are people who fuck up and do things that are bad as a kid, and you're like, oh, that's like, there isn't, no one is the arbiter of, like, good or bad. Everyone is just human. But this clearly didn't work for some people. Like, the guy that was yelling about it before, like, his inability to empathize is why this game didn't work for him. And so in that way, like, it's the irony is those are the people who need this game the most, because those are the people that put on the MAGA hats and they yell about cucks and simps and whatever. But they're the people that probably need the lesson in empathy. They're the people that need to play through it and suddenly go, oh my God, gay people are people too. Like, they need to have that revelation.
This is one of the things that I think is most difficult to talk about in this game. And that's saying something, frankly. There's a lot that's hard to talk about in this game. But, like, on one hand, it is 100% true that the game is trying to make you emphasize, that is trying to make you hate someone, and then turning around and trying to make you empathize with them. And that is difficult. Right. If the game does not get that right, it won't work. And for that matter, your mileage is going to vary on it. It will work for some people and won't work for others. And that is normal and okay. You know, we can have different experiences and opinions about this. At the same time, though, it seems quite clear that a lot of people basically came in determined not to allow the game to change them like that.
Right.
Yes.
And it's tough because you want to talk about that and acknowledge it, but at the same time, you can't do so to the degree that basically says, look, no, the game worked, it was good, you just aren't. And it's hard to, because sometimes that's true, absolutely, and sometimes it's not. And it's a very difficult discussion to have, especially with people who didn't empathize with them, because you're essentially accusing them of being too bad a person for the game to work. And I think sometimes that's true, and sometimes it's probably not.
It gets into that tricky thing of, like,
is dying. Just a second.
Is there a right way to play a game? Yes, kind of. In this case,
well, because you have to. I think the trap that we fall into is that it's sort of our expectations going into it. We expect it to be one thing, and when it's not, it's like, okay, like, well, that sucked. And that's not always the case, obviously. When you say something is bad, it's not always because it didn't fit your expectations, but that you thought that this was a game that was not going to allow you to, that was going to let this thing happen and just say, oh, by the way, you can still think of Abby in this kind of two-dimensional way. Like, I hate her, that's it. No, like, that's not what that game is. And, you know, if you don't like it, fair, that's fine. But, like, I think that's kind of putting up a wall to seeing what the game is actually doing and interact and engaging with that in a meaningful way.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that too, because what I've noticed, as Sam was alluding to before, when it comes to, like, the mileage varying, it's a tricky thing, because I think when normal people play this game, it probably works for them for the most part. Like, most people playing this would get the experience Naughty Dog was trying to convey. to what extent that media crit people like us and like other people that have talked about this game a lot are able to experience things in the same way that normal people do is probably questionable. So when it comes to like, well, how, to what extent did that work? That's not a question people are asking themselves. They're just like emoting with, I don't want to hurt Ellie, but she's fucking coming at me. Right. They're not, they don't have like the other track that runs after the fact and goes, but even though that emotionally resonated, you know, is that going to be effective for everyone? It gets into that tricky space of like, I could talk about this ending, and we will. That's what we're going to talk about with the epilogue to death. But to what extent it's going to work for individual people is just so tied to their experience and the attitude they have going into it. And like you said, the expectations they have as well.
I think that's one thing that's made more difficult by video games too. Not in a bad way for the medium, but like, it's one thing to see these characters and empathize with them if you're reading a book or watching a movie or something, but by forcing you to play as them, it's forcing you to identify with them, which like in not just a, you know, I get where they're coming from sort of way, but in a like I am them and I'm doing what they're doing sort of way. I think that's sort of inherently more of a connection between player and character, and that intensifies feelings for sure, but I think also makes it so that oftentimes if the game is trying to communicate to the player, especially when so much game design is centered around affirming what you're doing, right? Mm-hmm. That's more game design is, hey, if you do this good, you get a reward, whether it's just a, you know, the satisfaction of the sound that happens when you get a headshot or whatever, or, you know, another cutscene and more story. You did good job. And I think that when it comes to, it's very common. This game, Spec Ops: The Line, I think gets a lot of this response too, that when a game does not affirm you for doing these things, there is a negative response to it. And that's kind of a whole other thing, and another thing where your mileage may vary, but like, I think that there are a lot of people who had trouble dealing with this because it was, to one degree or another, the game telling them that the way, that the mindset with which they came into it isn't actually the one they should have. And some people respond to that by going, oh, that's interesting, I'll think about that. And other people respond to it by going, how dare the game tell me how, you know, what to think and how to, you know.
Well, it's fairly audacious. It's literally saying you've been living your life wrong. Like, it's pretty bold.
It is bold, yeah.
In that way, yeah. It's a strong...
But that's why people are and I don't always agree with it, but that's why some people are calling it a masterpiece, because of how it was able to do this. It's objectively like a technological masterpiece, obviously. Well, yeah.
I mean,
that frankly, it's ambitious enough that if it succeeds on any level, that is something.
Right.
And I think that the game has a lot of problems, but that specific aspect of it is not where most of those are. I would say, at least. I think that it did that part.
Yeah, that's
well.
not the issue for me with this game in general. My issue tends to be more the surrounding material that informs that thing they're trying to do, and how poorly handled so much of it is. Like, whether it's like the like where the violence is coming from. It's obsessed with cycles of violence, but it has no idea if it means structural or personal, and it gets muddled so much to the point at this ending where it's like it's so emotional that it's impossible to try and unpick what's happening. But basically what we get to is Abby is leaning over. She's got Ellie and Dina on the ropes, and Ellie goes, "No, don't kill her. She's pregnant." And Abby goes, "Good."
She's pregnant. Good. Abby.
And Lev is the one that steps in and has to go, fucking, what are you doing? Leave him, like, you won. We get it. You got what you came for. Like, leave him alone. And so at Lev's insistence, Abby spares both of them and tells them to leave Seattle forever.
I do have to say I love that detail, if only because Lev sort of being the metaphorical, like, awakening of Abby's, like, conscience is there just basically being her literal conscience. And I don't know. I do still take issue with the way the game treats pregnancy, but I think that scene was well done overall.
Yeah.
And I
Lev is the Ellie of this game.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, basically.
I mean, I wrote about it a bit in Level Story, but like, to what extent these games and Druckmann's work use women as props for growth for men is like a concerning trend. But in this case, they use them as props for women growing, so that's not nothing.
Again,
we have to take
Uncharted: The Lost Legacy also, just for the record, because it also takes a good break from that by giving you two female protagonists and having them actively be disdainful towards the male protagonists of the other games. It's a delight. It's very good.
I was gonna say, if you like are not the type of person who thinks you would enjoy the Uncharted games, that's a fine one to play because it's not too long and it's just fantastic the whole way through. It's so good.
Okay, noted.
Like, seriously, I love it.
I've only heard good things. I might actually check it out. Much as I'm loath to give Druckmann more of my money. Okay, we're going to take a quick ad break, and then we'll come back and talk about the epilogue and the ending, and just try and unpack this whole nightmare of how this game comes to a conclusion. Yeah. So enjoy these advertisements, and we'll be right back with you momentarily. Hey guys, this episode is brought to you by the Maynard Trigg series. MaynardTrigg.com is where you'll find them. They are my brand new low sci-fi, low fantasy, coming of age novel series. The first one is out right now, plus a free short story, and the second book will be dropping really, really soon. Go check it out. I think you'll really enjoy it. MaynardTrigg.com. Somewhere Neil Druckmann just like smelled money.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, good.
Like a shark.
Yeah. Okay. Well, on that note, we're back from our ad break. I hope you enjoyed those various products. Now, we're going to get into the epilogue and talk about the ending. Before that, I think it's a good opportunity to talk about length. The epilogue in some ways feels largely unnecessary. So a lot of people have that opinion. But I also wanted to briefly talk about the conditions under which this game was made. So like any software company and like any game company, there was a lot of crunch associated with the ending of this game. For those unfamiliar with the concept of crunch, basically, rather than working your standard like 38 hours a week, toward the end of large projects, particularly software launches, so whether that be apps or video games, there is a tendency for everyone to start working unpaid overtime, do nothing but work on the project, work on it on weekends, that kind of thing. Now, it's both a labor issue, but also it's an issue with the type of work that these people do. Software has been famous for like long hours and unpaid labor since the beginning of software. But it's particularly bad in the creative industries because there's like two competing factors that lead to this. The first is like, it's really hard to get paid for creative work to start with. And so when you have a company that's going to pay you a salary to go and work in a video game company and make a game, your impetus is like, well, I want to work really hard on it because I want it to be successful, obviously. But also it's creative work, so you probably enjoy doing it a lot of the time. But also you're part of the team and you don't want to let your teammates down. And it's all of these competing factors that lead to this general like sense of you can't not do the crunch if you work there. And Jonathan Cooper left Naughty Dog, and I believe he was an animator at Naughty Dog. And I'll just read you two of his tweets that explain it, where he says, "The reason I left is because I only want to work with the best. That is no longer Naughty Dog. Their reputation for crunch within LA is so bad it was near impossible to hire seasoned contract game animators to close out the project. As we loaded up on film animators, or so we loaded up on film animators. For the demo shown last September, the gameplay animators crunched more than I've ever seen and required weeks of recovery afterwards. One good friend of mine was hospitalized at that time due to overwork. He still had over half a year to go. There have been others since." Yeah, Naughty Dog is like not a great place to work when it's crunch time, is basically the upshot. I'm going to read you the snippet from Jason Schreier's the article I was alluding to before, that I read a quote from, where he sort of followed Druckmann around for a period of time. And this is pretty telling. So I'm just going to read you this snippet just to paint the picture of what it's like at Naughty Dog. Quote, one Friday night last month, some artists at the video game studio Naughty Dog were working on their latest game when they heard a crash. A large metal pipe had fallen from above them and landed right next to their desks. If it had been dropped a few feet closer, the consequences might have been dire. It was late, past 9 p.m., and the construction workers above had perhaps recklessly assumed that nobody was there. But at Naughty Dog, people are always there. The owners of the building reacted quickly, firing that construction team, hiring a new one, and installing new safety measures to ensure that an accident like that wouldn't happen again. To some Naughty Dog employees, however, it was emblematic of an unhealthy culture, the type of environment where a late-night construction accident might take place while people were still at the office. The Last of Us Part 2, the studio's new PlayStation 4 game about people trying to survive in the post-apocalyptic United States, will be out on May 29th. Today, as many of the developers at Naughty Dog put in nights and weekends at the office to finish the game, some continue to ask themselves a question that has haunted the studio for years. Is it worth it? As one Naughty Dog developer recently told me, the game is really good, but at a huge cost to people. Even in an industry where overtime is ubiquitous, where it's near impossible to find a game that isn't the result of weeks or months of crunch, Naughty Dog stands out. Its games, including the Uncharted adventure series and the original Last of Us, are widely considered among the best of the best, with ultra-realistic graphical fidelity and the type of meticulous details you just don't see elsewhere. Shooting a sack of grain in Uncharted 4 would cause the sack to deflate as barley poured out of it. Shining a flashlight at Ellie's face in The Last of Us led her to blink and turn away. Those details exist because Naughty Dog has built a culture of perfectionism, where games have to be great, no matter the human cost. End quote. Naughty Dog, it's a pretty grim picture that paints, but they've been notorious for pushing their employees for a long time. And it leads to this question of, what is it in service of exactly? And this is when when we talk about the ending, we'll hopefully try and expose some of our thoughts around this. But I think about Red Dead Redemption 2 when I think about this conversation. I think about a game that has something really to say that's quite complicated and says it well. And that game had a lot of crunch. And if the question is, was the crunch worth it for Red Dead Redemption 2? Maybe not all of it, but the product they put out was so sweepingly revolutionary in its own space. But when it comes to The Last of Us Part 2, it's the question of what is it doing? What's it in service of? Where is it going? Does this thing get you to the place where the developers thought it would be? Is it a cultural artifact that conveys value in a significant or meaningful way? And it just, I'm not convinced that it does.
I've got well, here, sorry, here's the thing for me. I would argue at least that this game has connected deeply enough for enough people that if the question is it valuable enough for the crunch, then I would say probably. But I don't think that's the question. I don't think that's how this should be framed, if I'm being entirely honest, because this game could have been made without crunch. Yes. I don't think that the question here, I don't think that it is. I think that the issue here is that regardless of what comes out of it, unnecessary human suffering is not good. I think that the question here isn't, is the game good enough, but couldn't it have come out a year later? Couldn't the team planning it have done a better job, organizing it in such a way that, I guess I don't feel like it's appropriate to put actual human cost and suffering in a question of whether it's worth it for an art thing. Because I feel like even if one could argue it is, that argument shouldn't be necessary, that the crunch is of implementation and organization and well, frankly, capitalism, that they could have just released it a year later or whatever, but the fact that all of their financial livelihoods depended on it put them in the situation where they had to do what they were told, where the company had to put the game out at a certain, I feel like, well, I don't know. I took issue with the framing there, so I wanted to sort of clarify my thoughts on that. That I think it's...
There's also this tacit implication, which which goes along with all of that, which is, and this is my issue with the discussion around these labor practices and things like that, because there is this tendency of people who don't work in these environments to decide for the people in those environments whether or not a particular working condition or something is acceptable, and they decide for these people on their behalf, like a series of assumptions around this stuff. And to the question of like, could it have been made and, you know, they just waited another year instead of like burning their employees and having them work, you know, weekends and nights? Probably. But also the culture that produces this kind of perfectionism in a video game is also the kind of culture that means that people are going to be working overtime anyway. So it's this issue of like, it's a broader cultural and structural issue that gets boiled down to these really simple like discussions so much of the time. And I don't feel a particular way about it. Like I don't necessarily think that when we talk about art, we should sort of debate it against like the relative merits of like the suffering that went into creating it. But it's an interesting discussion nonetheless, because I think so often there is just this like black and white, well, if they did crunch, it's bad. And that's not how it works. And that's not how people work. And for a game that deals with a lot of like structural issues and pretends that they're personal, it's kind of interesting that like this structural issue has caused so many people harm. There's something kind of ironic there. But I think, it's the question of like, what's it in service of is what we're going to talk about with the ending. But I'm less interested in whether or not, you know, whatever equation it is you want to do on the whiteboard, which is like, okay, was it worth all this time or whatever? I'm more interested in like, did it achieve the thing it set out to do? And to what extent does the ending either further that or kind of undo that? And it's such a controversial ending that I am like really excited to talk about it.
There's something I want to clarify here super quick. Was the crunch because of the ending? Because I'm just not aware of that. If so, like I was under the impression that the crunch was just, you know, making sure that all the animations and detail and stuff, like, was the game pretty much done? And then they were like, oh no, we're going to add this. We need to crunch for it. Was that a thing?
They basically had done my like top level understanding. And again, it's not those, it's like, they don't talk a lot about the process. Basically the crunch was a lot around the polish of the whole thing. So it was like, they were missing a lot of animations for most of production, like sound effects. There was a lot of polish that went into things like the breaking glass mechanics and the audio around. Like it was a lot of the perfectionism stuff that was the thing that ended up crunching for. But as far as like the chronological order in which they made the game, no idea. But it just seems like a fitting time.
We're going to be talking about whether the ending was worth the crunch. That seems like it would only... It seems like we can't necessarily put those two things in opposition to each other unless they were actually connected, particularly.
Well, you say that, but then like that's not how the internet works when it comes to discourse, where it's like people, because the ending was the thing that upset them, that is what they point to and go, okay, like it didn't end the way I wanted, therefore was the project worth it? Like, because I think it betrays like a fundamental lack of understanding of how these things get made. We talked about it a bit last time, Danielle, but like, this real simplification of like, I don't know, that somehow
because
them
you
crunching.
Didn't... Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go.
Well, I was just gonna say, just because like them like crunching, like, I mean, first of all, video game studios, like Naughty Dog's not the only company that does that. Like, and I hope people are aware of that, but and not that that's a good thing or a bad thing, just putting that out there. But the fact that like, if you don't like something, that crunch wasn't worth it, or just that the game wasn't worth it at all, like, it's just a disservice to the people who worked on it, regardless of what you feel about it. Like, obviously you're not going to like every game you play, but like, and that's fair, and you can critique that game in a meaningful way, but it's unfair to say that its existence like should not be and like was not worth it because you don't like it. Like, it just
it's kind of, I feel like, well, I don't know, sorry, I don't mean to like fixate on this, I feel like the question of whether the game was worth the crunch is sort of I don't usually say this because I'm very much a like, it's art. Art's important. Talk about it like art. But I feel like crunch is not an artistic issue. It's a labor rights one.
Yeah.
And I guess I don't really feel like conflating the value or even comparing the value of the art with the human cost necessary. Like not just human cost, because that includes like resources or whatever, but like human suffering that was sort of unnecessarily inflicted to make it is... It's a complicated issue. I don't know. I feel like I don't want to value or devalue the game based on that. I just want to call out that it's a thing that shouldn't be happening.
Right. Yeah, I absolutely agree. Yeah, it's my issue is like that is what people do. They conflate the two, and they and it's the kind of thinking that gets you to doing things like sending developers death threats and stuff like that. Like it's just such a fundamental misunderstanding of these processes and the work that goes into making these products.
I guess it does relate because, like, frankly, if you hear about just the horrible suffering that people went through to make this game, and your response is the game wasn't good enough instead of those people should not have suffered, then I feel like the game has something to say about empathy for you.
Right.
Yeah. It's actually this great game. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's called The Last of Us Part 2. It tries to teach empathy.
Weird, right?
Weird.
Yeah.
I just wanted to briefly talk about it because we didn't really touch on it last time, and just acknowledge that like these people work their asses off to make this thing happen.
Yeah, for sure.
So the epilogue. Okay, so we start with Ellie. Ellie and Dina are living on a farm with Jesse's son, who they're raising as their own.
Which was foreshadowed, by the way. Dina talked about how great it'd be to just live on a farm.
Yes.
Yeah, I did pick that up too. This isn't just any farm. This is the most middle American farm of your entire damn life. This is rolling waves of grain, baby. This is we're raising sheep. This is we're a happy family type shit out here. This is like, it's some idyllic.
It's rather heavenly.
Shit.
Really.
Yeah.
Hope
They
infected
fenced
don't come.
off.
Sorry. Sorry.
They fenced off this portion of this like beautiful valley where they're living on this farm, exactly as Dina talked about at the during the start of the game, where you're doing that free roaming section. However, not all is happy. Ellie is suffering from pretty severe PTSD. She sort of seems to be having these flashbacks relatively frequently. If only someone hadn't killed all of the medical professionals a few years ago. And everything, Ellie seems to be struggling a bit, but Dina's obviously their supporter. And Tommy arrives, and Tommy looks like shit.
Yeah.
He's a shell of his former self. But what he does do is he delivers information that he's got Abby's whereabouts. She's in Santa Barbara. And he basically emotionally blackmails Ellie and is like, look, I can't go. You need to do this for me. You owe it to me. You owe it to Joel. And him as the new kind of stand-in father for her. We see this is quite a conflicting thing for Ellie to hear. Dina basically provides an ultimatum. If Ellie leaves, they're quits. That's it. I'm taking the kid. Like, you need to let this go. In the middle of the night, Ellie gets up and decides to head off in search of Abby because she knows nothing about PTSD and thinks that this will like heal her trauma. Because again, someone killed all the medical professionals at a hospital 10 years ago. Which the irony is fantastic. She leaves, and it's quite a hard. It's sort of a hard sequence to go through because it is quite confronting. Seeing Ellie just like drag herself back into this deadbeat dad role, and choose to kind of fork out and kind of go after Abby. What did you guys think of the farm and the amazing fucking idyllic dream place these guys live in?
You know, I kind of already said it. Like, I mean, I do like it, but also, like, it just seemed a little too idyllic because I'm like, wait, they're, like, in the middle of nowhere just by themselves. Like, I mean, of course they can handle it because, you know, we've seen them kill a bunch of infected, you know, time and time again. But that was my first thought. I'm like, all the way out here in the middle of nowhere? Okay. But otherwise, that detail aside, I really liked it. I thought it was nice. I thought it was the ending, and I thought, not everything's perfect. She's still going through PTSD. But it's like sort of a bittersweet ending until we got Tommy arriving.
It's also everything Joel ever wanted. It's a big property in the same way that Jackson, where he has this mansion to himself, which is fucked. We haven't talked about that, but he has this giant house with like a workshop and like where he's making guitars and shit. And it's like this massive house in one of the only safe places we know about. He's living like a king, that dude. But yeah, Ellie gets everything that Joel wanted. Everything he was trying to reclaim in that first story. The family unit, the security, the American dream of owning your own land, of the exact thing that he lost when the world ended and Sarah died. She gets everything Joel ever wanted, and it's not enough, is basically the upshot. She's still suffering from this trauma, so she decides to leave.
And see, here's the thing, is I think that the farm scene is perfect, pretty much, up until a point, because I think that they have this happy life together, but Ellie is like forever going to be haunted by the fucked up things she did, is a perfect ending to this story.
Yes.
Absolutely perfect. Wouldn't change a thing. 100% A+ game. Love it. I was on board at that point. And then Tommy shows up.
Yep.
Again, fuck Tommy. I hate him so much in this story. And I don't think the rest of the game should have happened. I think that PTSD flashback should have included Ellie's own actions, not just Joel dying, and then have Ellie and Dina together. The end, perfect. Would have absolutely, like, honestly, that would have put the game notably higher in my estimation, if I'm being honest.
Agreed.
That would have been perfect.
Well, yeah, the story's weirdly still preoccupied with Joel's death. Like, even when Abby busts into the cinema, Ellie's first thought is like, she's like, man, like, I get it. You're here because of Joel. And Abby's like, no, I'm here because you killed my friends. Like, the game still remains oddly preoccupied with Joel.
Yeah. In
this moment where it should be about, as you're saying, Ellie looking in the mirror and sort of seeing all the things she's done to get there.
Yeah, and the thing is that I get that on some level, because that is how Ellie is. Like, of course, Ellie's going to be like, oh, that's why, because that's what she's obsessed with. And I understand that, because the thing is, like, yeah, this farm is overly idyllic. It's like, heaven here. But that's, very much intentional. She has everything. Everything is perfect. And then she, she's on this self-destructive revenge quest obsession still, and she leaves it behind. And I get that. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. They did what they did well enough. I just don't like it.
Yeah.
It's a confused way to do it. We then hard cut to Abby and Lev arriving in Santa Barbara, and they are on the hunt for the Fireflies. They are out there looking for the Fireflies, who are now good guys again, by the way. Don't you worry about how
they're never necessarily bad guys, just antagonists.
True.
I mean, they're listed on the wiki as villains, and I'm like, that's pretty telling that people are that reductionist.
Yeah.
Because I don't think that they're not bad dudes. They're just incompetent.
Yeah, and neither of these games are that reductive toward them either, but people tend to be so.
Yeah.
Exactly. Basically, they end up getting captured pretty quickly. Yeah. The mission goes south very fast, and they are captured by slavers, which is like, Abby is having some rough luck at the moment. So they're captured by slavers. Then we cut back to Ellie arriving at Santa Barbara. She's got a cool new silenced rifle. She's got a haircut. She's looking like a real deadbeat dad now. She fights through the slavers. There's a really cool sequence where she uses her immunity to get the upper hand in a fight. It's very cool.
Yeah.
Then she gets like run through with a knife, and she's basically bleeding out this whole time. She goes through this compound, rescues some prisoners, basically starts a riot as a distraction, and heads to the beach. And on the beach, there are the pillars, the aptly named pillars, where the slavers are, I guess, crucifying people, sort of. sort of unclear what their goal here is, but they
to die as an example, I guess.
yeah. And Ellie finds Abby and Lev and cuts them down. There are 2 boats on the beach here. Ellie turns to Abby and she's like, right, let's duke it out. It's time. I found you finally. It's revenge, baby. Let's do it. And Abby, who, by the way, looks like absolute shit. Like, she has gone through the wars. They've, like, cut her hair. She's like, really thin and ragged. And Ellie's bleeding out. But Ellie insists, no, this is fisticuffs time.
Yeah.
And in her desperation, she threatens Lev. So Ellie pulls a knife on Lev. She goes, if you don't fight me, I will kill Lev. And then we get the reverse of our previous sequence, or of our previous ending, where you as Ellie fight Abby. And it is a bare-knuckled brawl. Like, this is it is 2 grown women beating the crap out of each other. And it is hard to watch.
Very. That's
the cat wants to leave.
Internet content, so it's fine.
Yeah, we're fine.
Cats make everything better. It's
Sorry. I don't know if you guys heard her crying in the background.
Yeah, I was like, she sounds really sad.
She just wants out. Okay, sorry, continue.
Yeah, and we get our fight. We get this bare-knuckled, really well animated, like the sound effects are crazy good. Eventually, in the onslaught and the chaos, Abby bites off 2 of Ellie's fingers, her pinky and her ring finger. And Ellie manages to overpower Abby, and she starts to drown her. She's holding her under the water. But at the last moment, she has a flashback to her final conversation with Joel after the party. And we get to see them sort of reconciling. Ellie reaching out and trying to meet Joel in the middle, and sort of acknowledging his very awkward dad, like trying to relate to her stuff. She reaches out and she's like, look, well, let's, like, there's an effort to reconcile, and they agree to movie night the following evening. And in this flashback, Ellie seems to realize something. It's unclear what. And she lets Abby go. And Abby and Lev hop in their boat and they head off, and Ellie hops in her boat and goes home. But when she arrives home, she finds the farmhouse is empty. Dina has done the most breakup thing ever and taken all of her stuff and left only Ellie's stuff behind. And Ellie tries to play Joel's guitar, but can't with her damaged hand. And basically, like, we cut back to that porch, and we have Joel sort of playing that same guitar as the game sort of then fades into the credits. And the game is done. So, yeah, what did we think of the ending?
I have a lot, so I'll let someone else go through.
I have so much.
I mean, okay. I'll keep mine brief. That it hurt me deeply inside, this ending. Like, I think, like, the fact that she lost her fingers seemed to bother me the most, that she couldn't play her guitar when she returned. I'm sitting there and I'm like, dear God, like, there's just nothing left. Like, she can't even do that anymore. Like, it just hurt me so much. Just the fact that I didn't want to hurt Abby as well. Because again, I sort of became Team Abby in all of this. Not that, again, I was on a side, but, like, I did not want to hurt her. And the best thing I could think was, like, it was an ending that made me feel something very deeply, but, like, in a very bad way. Like, I read a book one time that made me feel so awful that I didn't want to see it ever again. Like, I just wanted to toss it out, and that's how I felt with this game. I was like, I don't even want to think about it. I just felt very bad when I finished playing it. and not in a good way. Like, not that I disliked the game, but like I just was like, I don't want to think about this for a few days. Yeah,
sounds about right.
Yeah, so
yeah.
Book this was.
What's that?
I know this is a tangent, but I have to know what book this was.
Oh, it's called The Collector by John Fowles. I'll send you the link because it's. I will say the comparison I'm making is actually not as apt because I think The Collector is legitimately like a good book. Or this game, like, not that I don't think it's good, but like the ending of The Collector, I'm like, oh wow, like it really made me feel something, and I like it for that. Where this game, I'm like, I hate the ending so much, like I don't even want to think about it. Like it pains me. I don't know.
Interesting. Yeah, I feel clearly very differently about it than most people. I really like this ending.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and the reason is, again, like I think the epilogue and the way it was like handled gameplay wise was just not great. But that Ellie can't play the guitar is something that's going to have to, and she leaves it behind as well, and she leaves all of her stuff behind, and she leaves all of Joel's stuff behind. It's like she's finally able to kind of put this past her and move on. There is some semblance of a future for her where this stuff isn't the only thing she thinks about, where this isn't haunting her at all times, his death. Instead, she's, the fact that she remembers that conversation with him, that perfect conversation with him at the end, is her acknowledging, like, okay, this thing is over, like this revenge quest is done, and maybe it has to be enough. Maybe the years I had with him have to be enough, and that lingering on this it's not getting anyone anywhere. I need to do the same thing I did with Joel and like reach out and get over it a little bit and try and work on getting over it. And in that sense, like emotionally, I resonated with it. The execution is like super weird though. Just the way that whole last section plays out. Cutting back to Abby felt like hugely unnecessary, like playing as her. Really confused as to why they did that. Yeah, it was an odd sort of thing to play through, but I guess I enjoyed that aspect of the ending. And I was particularly fond of how understated it felt it could be. Like, it didn't explain that that's what was happening. It didn't, like, even though she tries to play the guitar, which, by the way, like, you can learn to play a guitar without, like, it's like, yeah. But it's like symbolic of her finally letting go and leaving it behind, is like her actively, okay, like, I need to move on to the future and try and like create some kind of a life for myself outside of all of this stuff. So even though it was a pretty depressing ending, I actually found it quite hopeful, I guess.
Can I just before Sam goes, can I just add one thing and say that what also made me sad about the ending is that she kind of reached her worst fear that she said in the first game, which is ending up alone. And we don't know how it ends up, obviously. It's very open-ended, but that also hit me. The fact that she's not
better, frankly. Like, for my happy ending instincts would like for them to get back together or whatever, but like, that was fucked up, and Dina deserves better.
Dina deserves better,
yes,
man.
Agreed.
She's so cool.
Yeah.
She's so rad.
Yeah,
she does.
Like, Dina or Lev, I'm not sure, but I love Dina. She's great.
She is great.
Yeah, my okay, I've got so much going. Some of the small details, I guess. First, that last fight is extremely good in that it is stressful and hollow. And I needed every damn second of it, and that is perfect. That's exactly how it should be. They did a very good job with it. The one thing I hate about it, and it's not the only time in this game that I feel this is the case, but it's far and away the most egregious. I am sick and tired of games thinking that they need to be games all the time, especially when they're this narrative focused. Having a fail state for that, because I died a couple times in that fight, and nothing kills the emotional tension more than dying and needing to redo it and trying to better at the thing that you don't want to be doing in the first place. It just really hurt the tension in that scene. It makes me think of like when a JRPG like this, I love the hell out of Final Fantasy X, but it did this to me really bad. When it like ramps up for the final encounter and it's like, yes, the peak of all the story, it's all built up to this point. Let's spend the next 20 hours doing random crap to get the cool weapons. Like,
Yeah.
it's not good for your tension, and I think that nothing would have been lost if the game basically just took that fight and said, okay, you can't lose this. Like, you're going to do it, and it's going to suck, and it's going to drag on for as long as necessary for you to do this, because that would have been so much better for the feelings that it was evoking in me than dying and needing to redo it multiple times. I think that was a really big oversight, honestly, and yeah. This is sort of a broader issue, but I think that for the game to have done, I think at least, people complain about the game being a guilt trip. I made a whole video on my series about how I think that's extremely reductive and unfair to the game. But I
think that? What? A guilt trip? How so? Out of curiosity.
Well, just things like how, you kill a dude and someone's like, no, Alex, that they're...
to the player. Yeah.
The dog stuff. I even saw someone complain about killing Alice before I had played the game. Someone said something about how you kill a dog as Ellie and then the game immediately does a flashback to you playing with the dog to make you feel bad about it. So like when I played the game for myself and I was like, okay, so I killed a dog and then it pulled a long-term perspective shift that included the dog as a character and I briefly threw a ball for it. That is... like that way that it had been expressed to me before I played it just felt extremely in bad faith to me. Like there's a lot of sort of just complaints that the game trying to make what Ellie does feel bad to the player is essentially a condemnation of the player for doing it. And I just don't think that, like I said, I did a video about it, so I won't like go on about it for here super long, but I think that is very reductive. But the way that over the course of Abby's, because like for a while it does that, it makes it difficult to feel like you are dispatching all these evildoers or whatever, and that you're righteous for doing so. And then in Abby's, you kind of lose that. Like her story is about her regaining her humanity, but you care less that you're shooting all the dudes for the most part in Abby's. And then it does this epilogue thing where it's like, now you got to kill more dudes, except they are literally the worst.
These guys, they have slaves, they crucify people.
They sometimes like will punish or kill people by like letting loose other slaves who had been turned on them. Like, they are awful people, and I felt 110% justified in murdering each and every one of them, which is not what this game was trying to do. It feels really off, honestly. Like so there's that. Sorry.
Missed opportunity to have her kill a bunch of fireflies. Like,
oh gosh, oh no, oh that would.
like if you want to triple down, I'm like, why not have her do the thing that Joel did? Like, it's just confusing to me. I'm like,
that would have hurt so good.
Right.
Like, that's my primary story edit here for the whole game. I'm like, that. Make it fireflies. Make it that Abby and Lev have like found them, and they're there and they're successful. And Abby is gonna come and Ellie's gonna come and wipe them out to get to Abby and Lev.
That would have been a lot. Yeah, no, I'm with you on that.
Agreed.
I think my main thing in terms of the story for all of this is that I understand that it would have been very tone deaf, I feel like, to end this story on a purely happy note. Like, this is too complex, too much shit's gone down, too much humanity's been lost. It could not have just ended super duper happy. But I think that Ellie's PTSD accomplishes that. I think that the story up to that point, the lives lost in that process, I think that it has already been established that even just that perfect idyllic farm ending is not necessarily entirely good. And I feel like this whole epilogue basically existed to take Ellie's self-destruction in her obsession to an extreme that I don't think added that much, honestly. I feel like we had already seen how destructive and self-destructive her obsession was, and that we didn't necessarily need her to ruin literally everything good that had been built up in the story in order to get that point across.
It's a little reductionist in the way it approaches it.
Yeah, I get and like what you're saying about like some of the hope at the end and stuff. And for that matter, I love the idea of like that flashback that she had resolved to forgive Joel and then had that taken from her before she could. Because that's like, they don't make up in that cutscene. She says,
Right.
I don't know if I can forgive you, but I've decided I'd like to try. And then the next morning, they go out on patrol and Joel gets murdered. Like, that is extremely, like, that. I love that idea. I just don't think it's as revelatory as the game seems to think it is.
Yeah.
Like,
Oh, the game thinks it's the most important thing to ever happen.
yeah,
Right. Yeah.
my like perception of the entire story, and it reminded me, I don't know if you all played LA Noire, but that game had this thing where like there's this kind of tragic ending that I felt was really misplaced, and then there's a cutscene at the end about the main character's time in Vietnam where they just have a conversation and nothing happens, and I'm like, why was that there? Like, it
Very weird.
a little bit of that, just because I felt like it was supposed to mean more than it did, and I don't know. I like it. I think it should be in the game. I think it should have been somewhere earlier because it didn't change as much as it seemed like it was supposed to. I don't know. The whole structure of it really felt to me like it was trying to be more than it could, and in the process, all it did was give me a sadder ending than necessary without adding anything, is kind of my problem with it.
I think it's also like just confusing because like that's why I struggle with this game, because I'm wondering, what is it trying to be? Is it trying to be a story where Ellie is reconciling her relationship with Joel? Because that's not what it really feels like to me. And if it was that, and they had managed to pull that off, I think that scene would have been much more impactful. But then that also negates the fact that we have Abby in the game, and that's a whole other can of worms. And I like the scene. I think it was good. I just don't know its place here.
There was an interview that I read, and I forget where it is, but it was an interview with Druckmann where he said something about how we talk about the game as though it's about hatred and revenge and such, and it is to a degree, but it's also sort of in the end about forgiveness. And I 100% see where that's coming from and see how all these narrative pieces come together to form that, but I don't think they were fit together as well as they could be to make that as clear and resonant as it could have been.
Yeah.
Also, she doesn't forgive Abby. She just, like, we don't know the reason for doing that. Like, we don't get it.
That is what forgiveness is, but that is just kind of a whole other, that it can be what forgiveness is when someone has truly wronged you and you don't necessarily want them in your life, but you decide that resentment isn't going to control you anymore.
Yeah.
But that gets into a whole like philosophical discussion about it, so I don't know.
Yeah, but like, I just like operationally, like she forgives Joel, she doesn't forgive Abby, which is the thing she needs to do at the end.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point.
It's just weird.
Yeah.
like there's no. Yeah, it's just the material of that ending has very little to do with the story, which was about Ellie forgiving Abby, because Abby's obviously like gotten over it. She's gotten over the fact that Ellie killed all her friends. She's like, I don't want to have anything to do with this. I'm leaving. But it's that Ellie needs to forgive Abby for killing Joel. But what the game seems to conflate that with is Ellie needs to let go of Joel and let him be gone.
Yeah, that's interesting because I agree with all that, but there's this little thing nagging me in my mind too that points out that she, again, did not forgive Joel. She decided she was going to try and then didn't get to because he died. And I'm wondering if the idea here is supposed to be either that she didn't get to forgive Joel, but she needs to go the rest of that way with Abby, or that she won't get to forgive either of them, but nonetheless has to move on with her life. And I don't know if either of those work necessarily, but my brain is telling me that might be the angle. I don't know.
Yeah, either way, it's pretty ambiguous the way it is.
Yeah.
It's a
Which
little.
is the first game had an ambiguous ending, so.
Here's the thing. I mean, and we discussed this, in our Last of Us discussion, but like, I love ambiguous endings, but this is an example where I kind of don't. Like, and the reason I don't like it is because, like, with The Last of Us, the ambiguity was that, like, Joel lied and Ellie was kind of unsure. Like, she could sense that he lied, but she wasn't exactly sure, and so you don't know where their relationship was going. But with this, it just feels like just thematically disconnected to what the rest of the game was doing.
There are different types of open-ended things too, where like the first one was we know what happened and we don't know what will happen, and that insecurity about it is what made it such a gut punch. In this case, we're not necessarily sure exactly where all the characters are in the first place.
True.
And that can work, but I don't know. I don't know that it did here.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's a game. Last of Us Part 2 is like, it paints this like really vivid like nightmare journey for these two protagonists, and seems to like be really preoccupied with re-inflicting the same traumas on them over and over again. And I'll read you a quote from Rob Zachney's review from Vice Games, because I think it perfectly encapsulates the way that I feel about the game. But rather than like being this exploration of how violence and pain manifests, like really we just get a retread of like the stuff that happened in the first game in a lot of ways when it comes to the actual thing that happens at the end. The thing that you take away is like, yeah, violence is like bad and pain makes people do crazy things. Like it doesn't really manage to say anything new in its ending, and I think that's where it lets itself down, is it doesn't manage to stick that. And it just kind of says the same stuff as the first game, where it's like, okay, yeah, Joel did a really bad thing, and we don't know if Ellie can forgive him. And the end of this game is like, yeah, Joel did a really bad thing, and Ellie did a really bad thing, and we don't know if Ellie can forgive them. It's like, yeah, but that like didn't really give us anything new to work with. But I'll read you this quote, because I think it's pretty illustrative of how I feel about it. This is from Rob Zachney on Vice Games. Quote, "The things that serve as the catalyst for a story aren't always interesting reasons for its continuation. But that doesn't stop The Last of Us 2 from revisiting the same traumas every time it needs to justify the next bloodbath, and hoping that the screams and gurgles of the dying will give it meaning. The Last of Us Part 2 feels complacent, yet also preoccupied with its predecessor. Every facet of the original game has been expanded and enlarged, but not actually improved. It's as if its only inspiration is the original game and the well of pop culture it was drawing from. There is practically nothing new here we haven't seen and done repeatedly throughout previous Naughty Dog games. It sets out to surpass its predecessor, but the only meaningful contrast between them is that it's even more oppressive, bleak, and violent. It digs two graves, fills them with blood, and then just fucking wallows in them." End quote. And that's how all of us, I think, ended up feeling walking away from the game, is like it just wallows in that misery a little bit too much.
Which is unfortunate, because I feel like the degree to which that is, and I know I'm using this word a lot lately, but kind of reductive. I think that there is a lot genuinely of value in this game, but I can't deny that the ending does kind of give me that feel at the end of it.
That's actually one of my big problems too with the game, is that it is so preoccupied with the first game that, like, you know, that's just been my whole issue kind of since the start of it. Like, I just and that's kind of why I hold back from calling it a game that I truly love. Again, liked it, but certainly will never love it.
Yeah.
Where I think it's better than I think it is. No, that's not the way to say that. You know how there are some things that are really good, but not necessarily your favorite thing, and vice versa. They have more problems than other things, but like I could name a couple games that I think are just perfect, and they're not necessarily my favorites, like not in my top 5, you know. And I think that there's a pretty big degree here to which I think that some things about The Last of Us 2 have disqualified it from being a game that I love, while also believing that it is genuinely a flawed but very, very good game. Like,
absolutely.
The ending being one of them.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we've kind of talked to it now, and we'll wrap up in a second, but I just think for everything that it does really well, it fails operationally and thematically to justify its existence in so many ways. And that's got a lot to do with how all of that stuff shakes out when you're done with it, when you put down the controller and it's finished. It's not a game that I will be thinking about in the same way that I think about The Last of Us a lot. It's not a game that I'm not going to be using it in the same way I use The Last of Us when I'm trying to have a conversation with another journalist about like a particular type of narrative. I could see what they were going for, and you can see them reaching for it, but ultimately, like, I don't think it ends up having anything new to say, despite how amazing some parts of the game are, and despite how much I really enjoyed parts of it, and how affecting it is as well. Like, it's an affecting piece of art. Made me feel a lot of things, and that is commendable. But the feeling I left walking away with was just I was kind of numb, and just a bit empty. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it colors the way that I'm going to be thinking about it in the future.
I don't get what the game's going for either. Like, it sets up this feeling of numbness as sort of a negative thing, I feel like. So it
and then leans into it.
Supposed to be the way that, and I don't think it leaned into it intentionally necessarily, but I don't know.
I mean, there's a lot of decisions that they made to focus on different things that make me think it was hugely deliberate. Like the idea of like all of the people you fight have names, the dogs have names. They went to the effort of like, if you kill a guard who has a dog, then the dog will like go over to the body. Like, there are all these small details that are like there to elicit that sense of like, of just like grief and numbness and misery. Like, they put a lot of work into doing that stuff, but in service of like not much of like, doesn't say much. It's not in service of much. It just kind of does the things the first one did and aims for this pretty cool lesson in empathy. But yeah, ultimately, like, will not be thinking about it in the same way as the first one. And I'm just like excited to not have to think about it because I needed to talk about all this for my own sanity.
The thing I find most fascinating about this game is that, well, it seems that a lot of its issues sort of dampened our own enthusiasm. I do know a lot of people who were genuinely very touched by this game, and I don't think that's, I'm not going to do that like, if only they knew better thing, because that's really not the case. Like, I genuinely think of this game as the type of game that, with all of its ambitions and all of its flaws, will connect with various people better and worse than other people in entirely legitimate ways, because it's doing a lot here. And the problems that we have with it, well, substantive enough that we can talk about them and talk about their relation to the rest of the work, are also like, they're not very surface level, for the most part. Like, this is something we have to have a 3-hour conversation about to fully suss out. And, your average person isn't even going to notice those. Your average experience of the game, even if one can notice those things, isn't going to be too terribly affected by them. Like, I don't know. It's one of those things where I think that the game, obviously we're talking about a lot of problems it has, but I think it's a very telling and cool thing, honestly, that it nonetheless is capable of being such a, I don't want to say positive, because the game is not what I would describe as a positive experience, but such a powerful and beneficial experience for as many people as it has been.
Yes.
It's like, I think that there's a lot of value in it, even despite all of our misgivings and issues with it, and your like weight difference in how people perceive it. I don't know. It's one of those games that, like, I guess I'm glad that this type of game exists, even if not this one. Like,
yeah, definitely. Even if not this one, I'm glad someone's making them.
Yeah, because it's, I mean, despite, like you said, like the things where we feel where the game failed, it's just so interesting to talk about and to go over this stuff and kind of pick it apart, which I love doing with games, even, and especially with this one. Like, it is so somewhat polarizing that it's interesting kind of getting down deeper and trying to figure out where the problems exist and really how it moved us, despite its flaws.
Absolutely. And that's probably a really good note to wrap up on. I think, we all liked it enough that we were like, let's spend 4 hours talking about it. But Sam, to your point, it was something I mentioned at the top as well. Like, we obviously talk and think about stuff in a, like, and delve into things with a depth that like most people don't need or want to do, and that's just like part of what we do for a living. So it is important to acknowledge, like, for most people, this would have been like a great experience. They would have played it and had a great time, and got something from it. And that's really like all you can ask for something that is, you know, in this space of the AAA game.
Or most people, they would play it and be mad about something and then hate the rest of it anyway.
Or that
Yeah.
also could, and you might make a YouTube channel where you yell about it, maybe, if you want to. Yikes. Well, that's gonna do it for this one. This has been quite a journey. I feel like I've aged 100 years talking about this game. Danielle, did you have any pluggables you wanted to talk about? Where can people find you on the internet?
Yeah, you can find Level Story over on levelstory.net. All the social media is on there, but for Twitter, that's Level Story Mag.
Cool. And Sam, where can people find you? Where can they consume the content you make?
Games is Lit 101 is on YouTube. It's youtube.com/gamesasliterature, but if you search Games is Lit 101, you'll find it. I'm also on Twitter as @GamesIsLit. But yeah, if you're interested in the stuff I make, just head to the YouTube channel, find an analysis of a game you like, and I hope you like it.
Yeah, if you liked this chat, chances are you'll like Sam's content. It's like, this is all the stuff that we all think about all the time, and it's all we ever talk about. So
I'll do good stuff outside of this, so you know, it's just you'll like Level Story. You'll like it's all similar.
Well, thank you both
Honestly.
for giving me a great deal of your time for this and for putting up with the many segues and various lanes we ended up driving down in this process. If people want to support the show, the best way to do that is to send it to one person you think might like it. Otherwise, give it a review wherever you find it. That stuff does really help. And do whatever else you do with podcasts that you like. You guys know what to do. Otherwise, support the various advertisers and products within the advertising throughout the podcast. Thank you so much for listening if you've made it to the end here. This has been a really interesting exploration for me and delving into some of the underlying assumptions that went into the creation of this game. And I've really enjoyed getting to the heart of like of why this is such a complicated thing to talk about. I've got nothing else, guys. That'll do it. Thank you so much for listening or watching. This has been a journey of 1,000 years.
Epic journey.
Across Seattle. Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, I still can't believe they made me kill the dogs. Thanks, guys.